I think it would be kind of fun, Gerry, if I asked you like a bit of your bio and you just shouted stuff at me.
Oh.
Is that okay? So it'll be more like that. G'day and welcome to Pints with Aquinas. My name is Matt Frad, and yes, this is the fourth set that Pints with Aquinas has had. We had those other two, the black one, the wall that said the Matt Frad Show. Then we were upstairs in my kitchen. Well, my wife, while I was gone in Chicago recently, decorated my office, and I feel desperately happy about it. I think it's beautiful. I think she's done a great job. And I'm really pumped that we have these like crane microphone stands so that we can just sit back and relax and chat. In fact, today, before 9 p.m., I'm going to be getting a cigar air filter, which is supposed to be like the Mac Daddy. So in the next episode, provided that my guest is cool, and there's a chance that they won't be, right? But we will sit back and have a cigar here. I'm pumped about that. We should go check in case. Anyway, look, the thing is, the interview's already over. That's why you'll find out towards the end we start drinking whiskey. I'm not advertising Old Dominic's. They're not paying me, though they should, because it's one of my favorite bourbons. Anyway, today I'm interviewing Dr. Gerry Crete, who is a
marriage and family therapist.
And who... More.
And a professional counselor.
And a professional counselor who runs the apostolate
Souls and
Hearts, which is a free podcast
called Be With the Word.
Oh, is it called Be With the Word?
Yes.
Why isn't it called Souls and Hearts, if that's your thing?
Because we have a number of podcasts.
Oh, stop it.
For Souls and Hearts.
He has a number of podcasts. Be With the Word, Fly on the Wall.
Yes.
More to come. Courses and blogs.
Yeah.
What the heck are you waiting for? What's it called? The URL?
What?
URL. What's the URL?
www.soulsandhearts.com.
Soulsandhearts.com. It's below, so click the link. Gerry is one of my most favorite people, and I'm not just saying that because he's sitting over there. He is the dungeon master in our Dungeons and Dragons games that we play once a month. He goes to my Byzantine church. He used to be my therapist. He's an incredibly brilliant guy and has had a lot of very important things to say. In this episode, we talk about dealing with anxiety, what anxiety is. We talk about trauma, what that is, processing it. We talk about, what else do we talk about? Healthy attachments. What? Addictions. We talk about porn addiction. This is going to be a tremendously helpful episode to you. Like you personally. You, like me, are broken. There's stuff in your life that you're working through, trying to find healing in. And I think that this episode is going to help tremendously. So please stick through to for the whole show. You're going to really love it. And if you haven't yet, click that subscribe button and the bell, and that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new video. All right, here is the episode with Dr. Gerry Crete. Gerry Crete, how are you?
Doing well, Matt. Good to be here.
I'm so glad that you could be on the show. For those who aren't aware of you, tell us about yourself, your new podcast, all the good work you're doing.
Oh, yes. We have a new program called Souls and Hearts, which is an online mental health education resource. We have podcasts. We have Be With the Word, where we, a friend of mine, Dr. Peter Malinowski, who's a clinical psychologist in Indiana, and I reflect on the Sunday readings, and we look at them from a psychological perspective, as well as a spiritual perspective. And we've been doing that now for a couple months.
Awesome.
Yes, I love it. I'm actually growing in my faith doing it, and really forcing me to really look at the readings.
I look forward to talking about that a bit later. Yeah. But as far as your official role, what are you? Well, I mean, I know you, but they don't know you. So who are you?
I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional counselor. And I'm also an EMDR therapist. I do a lot of work with trauma survivors, do a lot of marriage counseling, do a lot of addiction work, depression and anxiety, of course, as well.
I can't wait to get into all of this. I'm really excited to learn. But before we do, I really want to know kind of how you got here. You know, like how did you get into this, and how did you get into like marriage and therapy counseling specifically? Right. At what point in your life did you decide to go into this field?
Right. Well, I had a journey. I didn't have the normal route. I'm from Canada originally, and I actually, studied history, studied English, and was actually worked as a teacher for a number of years. Then I gradually moved into school counseling by doing a master's in counseling. Mm-hmm. And then I did a PhD in counseling psychology and education. And so, I was just called into working with couples. I had a wonderful mentor who was a marriage and family therapist who really taught me about systems thinking and how you can really make a lot of change by working with the system. Yes, and working one-on-one with the individual is good. Yeah. But working with a couple, working with the family, it's actually a way more Catholic approach.
So you were working as a school therapist, you said, before you did your PhD?
Yes, school counselor.
Okay, so as school counselor, I guess you didn't need any kind of credentials to...
Oh, yes.
You did?
Oh, yeah. I had a master's degree, and you had to be certified in the state as a school counselor.
Okay. And then, okay, so just for my benefit and for those out there, and I think I've asked you this before, but I forgot, what's the difference between a psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, therapist? There's all these different titles.
Sure. Well, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. So they actually prescribe medication, right? And they've had training in psychological issues as well. A psychologist often does therapy, but they also are trained to do assessments. So they do a lot of evaluations and so on. Whereas marriage and family therapists, counselors, clinical social workers tend to focus on doing clinical work.
Okay. So were you a kid when you decided you wanted to start helping people one-on-one like that? Like,
No, I wasn't. I mean, I think as a kid, I can remember actually doing some 8th grade test, it's called the DAT.
Okay.
And it gave me 3 options at the end of it. It said you should be a lawyer, a psychologist, or a teacher. Huh. So I did 2 out of 3.
Those seem like very flattering options. I wonder what other people got.
Right. Truck driver.
Yeah.
But no, I actually had really shockingly low scores in mechanical reasoning. So I kind of knew I was never meant to be an engineer or anything like that.
I think I'm like that too.
Yeah. So I always knew. What's funny is when I was in undergrad, I took psychology courses. I actually hated them initially. So I didn't think I was going to go into that area at all, actually. I loved history. I loved theology. I loved philosophy, English, literature. I loved all those things. I thought I would like psychology, but I didn't at the time. So it was actually an evolution for me.
Tell us about give us a bit of a history lesson with regards to psychology, because I know that Aristotle and Aquinas talk about the soul. I think Aquinas, when he talks about the soul, he puts it more in positive terms, like how the human being ought to function, how it ought to act in order to be healthy. When I think about psychology today, though, I think about like things that have gone wrong with a human and how to fix them. But just 'cause I know nothing about this, how has psychology progressed?
Well, really, psychology as a modern science really began, I would say, in the late 19th century. But I would argue that psychology goes back, all the way into philosophy, because really, what is philosophy? But an understanding of the mind, an understanding of the human person, an understanding of our place in it, and actually psychology looks at that as well. Yeah. The modern science is focused originally, focused on developmental stages and finding out when there are changes or what happens when those stages are frustrated, right? And therefore what problems occur when they are frustrated, and how you can correct that or work on that. But there are multiple fields within psychology. There are multiple disciplines, and maybe people don't always realize that. Everyone sort of assumes, Freud and the whole sitting on the couch thing. I mean, that's classic psychoanalytic psychology is really not practiced very much today.
Tell us what that is. What is that kind of method of psychology that Freud's known for?
Well, in general terms, you are looking at the subconscious and you're understanding what are the drives that are going on in the subconscious mind that are influencing the conscious mind. And you're working with that person to, uncover those and, work through past issues and understanding your defenses and why we have those kind of defenses. But most counseling today tends to come at it from a behavioral cognitive viewpoint, which is really about figuring out what are the beliefs that you have that are informing your thoughts, that are informing your feelings.
And those beliefs may be subconscious, but maybe not. So whereas Freud, it sounds like a lot of the things, the reasons we act the way that we do are based on subconscious
Right.
A lot of it had to do with sex too,
Yeah,
right?
Freud in particular looked at sexual development. Other early psychodynamic theorists were looking at other, you've got Erikson looking at different developmental stages in childhood that weren't just focused on sex. You've got Jung, who is looking at the collective unconscious, trying to understand how we all relate to we all have archetypes, and we all relate to this sort of like overall consciousness, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. But the idea that we should be focused on human behavior and changing human behavior was a branch away from that psychodynamic.
Okay.
And the cognitive behavioral model is actually the more dominant practice currently.
So why wasn't Freud presumably he was into changing certain types of behavior. That's why he did therapy.
Right. So
how did this branch away, and how is it different?
Well, it's different because truly, and I'm not a Freudian and I'm not a psychoanalytic theorist, so I'm not the best person to answer that question probably, but it takes a long time in his model. I mean, you would have to be, in his model, you were doing therapy, multiple days a week for possibly a year or more. So it's an extremely in-depth exploration of the subconscious. The behavioralists branched away from that, and they said, no, we don't have to go into the subconscious. There's all kinds of scientific studies to understand behavior. Think about things you might know, like Pavlov's dog, right? You understand, you might know that one where you ring the bell, give the dog, some steak, ring the bell, steak, and he salivates, right?
Yes.
And so the idea is that you don't give him the steak, but you ring the bell and he's still going to salivate.
Yeah.
So the whole behavioral model was about changing behavior. Okay. There's no issue of going into the subconscious to explore that. It's just human behavior can be controlled, if you will, and modified.
Do you think it came from a point of view that we need to help these people now, as opposed we don't have months to sit around and speculate about the subconscious?
I think it came from that, in my opinion. I mean, I think there was a lot of criticism of Freud in the psychodynamic method. Even some criticism of, is there really a subconscious? It was even a question that was asked.
Yeah, interesting.
And so it actually did open up certain spiritual questions came up as a result of even having subconscious.
Actually, let me ask you that. What is the subconscious then? What do we mean by that? All right, I want to take a pause from our conversation and say thank you to one of our sponsors, Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is the best filtering and accountability software on the web. Do you struggle with pornography? That's something we get into in today's discussion. Well, accountability software, filtering software makes it a whole lot easier to be free of porn. Not only does it block the bad stuff, but it will send a report of your internet activity to somebody who cares about you. It puts you in connection with another human being who loves you. CovenantEyes.com is, I'd say, an absolute must if you have children and want to protect them from porn, which of course you do. So do the responsible thing right now. Go to CovenantEyes.com, and when you buy it, use the promo code MattFrad, and you'll get it the first month for free. So you can try it out, month for free. You have nothing to lose. CovenantEyes.com, promo code MattFrad. And then when you try it out, I think you'll love it and you'll continue with it. I have it on my phone, on all of my devices. We don't let our children play at people's houses who don't have good accountability and filtering software. It really is something, I think it's a must. It's not like a perk. You should really go get it. CovenantEyes.com. Use the promo code MattFrad to get it for a free, get a free month. And yes, CovenantEyes.com. Actually, let me ask you that. What is the subconscious then? What do we mean by that?
Well, the subconscious, it's a big question. So it would be the almost
background. I just think of things happening below the surface.
Yeah, we have a conscious mind. So the way I look at it is a little bit, the left brain, so to speak, is cognitive, linear, processing everyday functions. The subconscious, the idea of the subconscious is that's where the processing is happening of material that a person is trying to make sense of, possibly even dreams access the subconscious, but it also is our creative aspects, our non-linear kind of having to solve deeper life issues, maybe even.
Gosh.
Yeah. The way I look at it, I would even say at a core, our memories are accessed probably to some extent through the subconscious.
Yep. Okay. And that's not really practiced so much today. You said, at least the way Freud did it.
Definitely not. No, the model right now is cognitive behavioral, which I was saying. And so the idea behind that is that if you change if you challenge your beliefs,
yep,
then it will change your thoughts, and therefore your emotions will follow.
Okay.
So, and it's useful. And I actually use cognitive behavioral techniques often in the work I do.
Yeah.
However, the kind of work I tend to do now actually is integrating the body and possibly the subconscious, right? At least I call it the right side of the brain, which is the emotional center, the creative center, the place where memories are kind of stored in a non-linear manner. And the idea that the cognitive side, as well as this emotional center, as well as the body, are all connected. And so in order to, really have good healing, you kind of have to address all three. And it isn't just a question, in my view, of challenging negative beliefs, which is what cognitive behavioral therapy is getting at. It is really about helping a person access in a safe way maybe that material that is stored in that right side of the brain, if you will, possibly the subconscious, and accessing it in a way where a person could actually start to make changes and adapt in new ways. And that's actually where I fall and where I believe real change could happen.
I can't wait to explore that. I want to ask you questions about addiction and how we turn to things to try to make ourselves feel better, but we end up feeling worse and our lives can start spinning out of control because we're trying to cope in this negative way. But before we get to that, I want to kind of just maybe address a couple of sort of objections that people might have to therapy. Nothing, I don't hear people kind of articulating arguments against therapy, but I think people tend to have maybe a prejudiced view of therapy. Like there's a stigma around it, like there's something seriously wrong with me and I should be able to get this together on my own. And then I also think people would say things like, why would I pay somebody just to go and talk to them? I can do that with my friend. What are some other things that you encounter when people come to therapy for the first time and they're questioning whether or not they should be there?
Absolutely. What a great question. I think the history, right, of psychology, we were talking about Freud and ones that follow, is around people with serious pathologies. So if you have people, they used to say with neuroses or people with schizophrenia or people with serious mental conditions would go to one of these psychiatrists or psychologists to be kind of worked on, right, and fixed. And so, even the idea of a shrink, I'm going to see a shrink. And that has a really negative connotation in my mind. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I actually don't typically work with pathology. In other words, I don't work with serious mental illnesses. I mean, obviously, I know about them, and I can work with them to some extent. But if they need medication, I send them to a psychiatrist. If they need further evaluation, or if they're not really, their issue is not in my scope, I send them to someone else. What I love, the area that I love working in, is working with couples, for example, because it's not talking about pathology normally. I mean, if I identified one, then, we would have to zoom in on that and get extra help. But in general, couples, you're really helping a marriage improve. You're helping people live a better life, right? And so everybody, even if your marriage is good, most people can have some improvement. They could have better communication. They could have better connection with each other, deeper kind of, happiness in the relationship.
So here might be another objection then. Okay, so today, maybe when a lot of people go to therapy, they're not necessarily going because they have these severe pathologies.
Right.
So someone might say, well, doesn't this just amount to navel gazing? I'm going to go and talk about myself and how I feel and what's going on with me. I could see someone, and I'm not sympathetic to this view necessarily, but I could see someone saying, yeah, this is kind of part of your problem. Like, you need to get out of yourself, be with other people, think about someone else for a change, instead of like paying someone money to sit down and talk all about you. It's very sort of egotistical maybe.
Right. Wow. Well, I have a number of responses to that, right? One is that actually different people come to counseling or therapy for different reasons. And one thing is, if you think about our society, and a lot of people are never listened to. So we go around, we're taking in information, whether it's television, media, we're constantly, being talked to, or if we're talking to somebody else, it's all functional.
Yes.
There are so many people, nobody truly listens. And so for some people, coming to counseling and therapy allows them to be listened to be heard, to be affirmed, to be valued. And it's a powerful experience.
That's a really interesting point. I had never thought of that. Yeah, I even think like in my marriage, like a lot of the conversations are just that. They're functional. Like, okay, I need you to do this and can you do that? Or
right.
And it's so important that we sit down to like, where are you at? How are you? And I think that's even like probably a good thing in a marriage today. It may not be as common as we would hope it is in marriages. I'm sure not nearly as common.
Right.
But yeah, that's a really interesting point, hey?
Yeah.
I have this idea that this is why people like going to coffee shops. They want to go somewhere where somebody knows them. They want to go somewhere, like they don't want to be anonymous. They want someone to be like, hey, Gerry, John, or whoever.
And that's one level, but what I'm talking about in terms of really listening, I don't think you're going to get at a coffee shop typically.
Totally.
Right? It's about really going deep. And sometimes it's sharing things that are shameful, sharing things that are painful, sharing things that are just hard, allowing somebody to really hear what's going on in an environment where you aren't going to be judged. The person is bound to confidentiality, right? They can't share it with anybody else. And their whole job is to support and help you.
Sounds great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for some people, that's just, worth its weight in gold, right?
Yeah, even just, sorry to keep dwelling on this point, but you've really brought up something that I'm just beginning to think more about. Like even children, how often children, we don't listen to them. We just, we tell them to stop being a nuisance and we redirect them, or we put a screen in front of their face. And so for many of us, we're not really listened to. Do you think that this generation is doing a poorer job at listening to each other than in the past? And if so, why? How?
Well, I think this generation is actually communicating more than ever before, but not listening well.
Yes. I heard somebody say we're actually reading more today than we did 20 years ago. But what we're reading are tweets and instructions and things like that.
Right. It's a lot of people expressing their frustration, their anger, their pithy remarks, but nobody's really listening to the other person. And I don't think you can quite get that remotely. I mean, I'm sitting here with you right now, and I'm able to really look into your eyes. I'm able to see your human person. You're right here. Yep. I can connect with you, but I can't do that on a tweet or Facebook message.
Even like a chat. What do you call them? As chat rooms and things.
Yeah, definitely not a chat room. I mean, you can with maybe video conferencing. You can definitely get there more so, but it comes back to this idea of deep connection. And as human beings, we are wired for connection. We need connection to survive.
All right, I want to say pause to our second and final sponsor. That is Hallo, Hallow. Hallo, or as you Americans call it, Hallo. Is that right? Hallo is a fantastic app that's going to help you to pray better. Download the app. It's got different Lectio Divina things that you can go through. You can choose a woman to read to you, a man to read to you. You can put synth music in the background, Gregorian chant. It's like those... Do you know of this, Gerry? Have you heard of Hallo?
I have.
Good. It's like those meditation apps like Calm and Headspace, but it doesn't get into the weird... I shouldn't say weird, but... There we go. Weird, new age ways of thinking that can sort of pervert the Christian faith. Hallo is 100% Catholic and it's excellent. I have it. My wife has it. We really enjoy it. Hallo offers a permanently free version of their app, which includes content that's updated every day, as well as a paid subscription option with premium content. But by using the promo code MattFrad, one word, you can try out all of the sessions in the app for a full month, totally for free. To take advantage of this special offer, visit hallo.app/MattFrad. hallo.app/MattFrad and create your account online before downloading the app. We'll put a link below in the show notes. Check it out. Well, I think this is a good response then to the objection that this is just sort of narcissistic and navel-gazing.
Right.
But is there ever a point where you have someone come and you're like, okay, like you're far too focused inward, or is that not even a legitimate objection in your mind?
Well, honestly, I think that if a person is coming in and that's what their goal is in counseling, is really to bare their soul and open up and be listened to, then I'm not going to judge that. I'm not likely to say, I think you're good enough. You're kind of narcissistic. Stop focusing on yourself. Like I'm just not. I let that person decide, because I just feel like it's a basic human need. If they're coming for that purpose, then it's it's their decision, it's their need they're expressing.
And if what you're doing is legitimately helping, which I know that it is, then if somebody comes to you with this kind of navel-gazing attitude, you hearing them is only going to help them.
Right.
Yeah. Get out
right.
of it.
And it might be that there's the possibility that if in their regular life, if I discern or if I'm kind of getting the sense that they are also never listening to others at all. I mean, that could be something I bring up, or find a way to bring up, to explore with them, and maybe to challenge them to listen to others as well. And maybe I could do that by saying, hey, what was it like this session to just have me here with you and listen to what's going on for you, and have them express that. And then I might, in that case, say, I wonder if you can do that with someone else. I wonder if you're able to do what I'm doing with you. I wonder if you're able to do that with your friends or your spouse or your parent or whoever it is in your life. And then they kind of get a challenge.
I want to get into things like attachment theory, as I say, trauma, addiction, boundaries. But how long have you been doing? I just want to get to know you a bit more, right? I want our audience to know, like, what's it like being a therapist, sitting down for 8 hours a day? Like, you've got your own crap. You're probably trying to process at different times. What's that like?
Right. Well, I can honestly say I love my job. I mean, sometimes I work too much and I get tired. And sometimes the burdens can be a little heavy and I have to do a good job of kind of processing that. But I honestly love my job. Like, I'd never have the situation where I wake up in the morning and go, I don't want to go. Right. I've had that sometimes even in jobs I've liked before. I've felt that way, but I actually don't feel that way, because the times when I'm working with people, I consider to be precious. I don't know if other therapists would say that, but I actually do. I come at it with a Catholic perspective, and I really see the person I'm sitting with as a person created in the image of God and a valuable, beautiful person. And so the privilege of being able to sit with that person to help them work through things. And sometimes it's not always just listening. I mean, we might have implied that before, but sometimes they're coming in and they actually want to solve and work on some issue or problem in their life. And so the therapy is a little bit more directive than just me sitting there listening the whole time and nodding, right? But to get back to what you were saying, how did I get here?
Well, how you got there, but what's it like being a therapist in general? I mean, 8 hours a day you're listening to people. I would imagine that if you weren't seeing concrete signs of success, or advancement, progression in the people that you were working with, it would be a very dispiriting and depressing job, because you have people presumably they're not coming in to tell you how great their life is, or if they are, it's only because they're covering something awful, which you need to get to. But I imagine, it's got to be difficult. So that must be a beautifully rewarding thing to see people actually begin to advance and find healing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, specific things I work with, are things like trauma, and so people are having panic attacks or high levels of anxiety, or they're in deep depression. So if I see that improvement, right, if somebody's coming in saying, oh, I'm not having panic attacks anymore, that's extraordinarily rewarding. A lot of times I don't always know, because somebody will go to counseling for a while and then they just stop or whatever, and I might hear later how much it meant to them, but I don't necessarily know at the time. So I do have to a great extent, trust the process, and just trust that what I'm doing is important, and just do what I can, and not focus on the outcome.
I want to get to anxiety. Before I do, and we talked about this in a previous episode that we've done, but we've got to address it again. Aquinas in the Summa Theologiae has 5 remedies for sorrow.
Right.
And I find that often when people read spiritual authors, maybe they're afraid that they're going to be too stoic, too difficult. Teresa of Avila, sometimes I read her, I'm like, oh man, alive, I'm not allowed to enjoy anything. And I'm sure that's not what she means, but sometimes I get that impression. Whereas Aquinas talks about 5 remedies for sorrow, and let's see if I can remember them. The first is pleasure, just generally,
right?
Because he says that just like the body rests, in sleep, which helps with weariness, so the soul rests in pleasure to deal with kind of internal weariness. I'm probably not going to get these in order, but he says like talking to a friend.
Right.
And one of the things he says is because it helps when you can share a burden. If you share a burden, it's easier to carry, and also to see in them their concern for you will alleviate sorrow, which just got to the point we talked about a moment ago. That's really beautiful.
Right.
Crying He says, because something is better when it's let out and not shut up. And he said, and we all feel better if we can act in a way that is, in tune with what's going on inside. Like, no one likes to have to go to a party if they've just had a fight with their spouse, and you're going to put on this fake kind of face, or maybe not fake, but
right.
pretend to be something you're not. So I love that. He says contemplating the truth, because he says we're not mere beasts who can be happy with sex and food and whatever. It is interesting when animals, I don't know how true this is of all animals, but when animals have all their needs met, they go to sleep. When humans have their needs met, we ask questions, which is why philosophy kind of was able to arise only in a time of prosperity in ancient Greece.
Well, can I comment on at least two of those? So the one about the truth is about accessing the cognitive side.
Tell me why. What does that mean?
Because you're asking those questions and you're looking at truth and you're processing that. Mm-hmm. But on some level, if you're looking at truth, you're also reflecting and analyzing at a deeper level. So I think you are actually crossing over into that right side as well. But the crying is the emotional center. So having some kind of catharsis, to use a more Freudian type language, is also to have that release, emotional release, which we tend to bottle things up. So in those two examples, you've actually touched on cognitive and emotional centers of the brain.
This is what I meant when I said, like, Aquinas addresses psychology, but not in psychological terms we use today. And then finally, and then I want you to comment on these, the final one, which is my favorite, is sleep and baths.
Right.
He said, if you're sad, having a good night's sleep, having a hot bath will help you because it'll help the body. And this gets back to what you said a moment ago. So feel free to kind of comment on
the body.
That.
So really, that's beautiful. I'm so excited that Thomas Aquinas really supports the theory that I work from, which is, emotional center, cognitive center, and the body. And that you really want to address all three. When you ignore one, you really are, missing a lot. And I think that Thomas Aquinas, I'm sure, would agree with me here that the other side is care of the soul, right? Like on some level, spiritual growth, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm so privileged as well, being a Catholic therapist, that I'm allowed, when the client is okay with it, to bring in spiritual aspects. So I feel like we are working on the mind, the body, and the soul in that process.
And what's interesting is today I feel like Catholics are on the verge of demonizing this talk of self-care. Because they worry that it sounds a little weak, a little narcissistic, all about you. But understood correctly, that is kind of what Aquinas just spoke about. Right. Like if he's saying, hey, have sleep and baths, he's kind of saying, though maybe not in the way we would today, like have some you time, like relax so that you can then be better to do what God's called you to do or whatever.
I think it's amazing that people would criticize it that way, because it's a wrong diagnosis of the problem in our society. Is how I see it.
What's a wrong diagnosis?
The idea that having self-care is narcissistic or some kind of problem. I really think our society lacks self-care. Okay. We overindulge in certain ways, but even the ways in which we overindulge often aren't really self-care.
Give us some examples.
Well, examples I would say would be of things we think are relaxing. Maybe would be like, busy being on the internet, going on Twitter and Facebook and all these different social media things, like as if that actually relaxes us.
Yes.
Or even like I'm not against these things, by the way. Even video games, I'm not opposed overall to video games, but it's not relaxing. Right?
Yeah.
It isn't to play most video games anyway.
Right.
Even television can take on an aspect of, you've got to you're binge watching something. It can just lead you into numbness, but it can also almost be anxiety inducing. All these things are high stimulus things that are keeping our minds busy, busy, busy. So everything we do, like all day long, our minds are busy, thinking, planning, organizing, getting from here to there, where our jobs, even our drives to work, it's just a lot of input coming in and busy, busy minds. And a lot of the time we don't realize how stressed we actually are chronically throughout the day. So to say we don't do self-care, well, some of the things may look like you're relaxing or you're indulging in leisure, but you're really maintaining a stressful body state.
So would you say in some ways that like this generation needs legitimate more self-care perhaps than when you and I were kids?
Totally. I do believe that.
And is that because of technology primarily, or?
It's a big one. It's a big one because I don't know about you. Like I can remember as a kid, just being kind of thrown outside and go play, and you just have long leisurely days.
Yes,
you're just sort of hanging out. Maybe you meet some friends. You just play outside. Sometimes you just sit. I'm just even sitting on a tree. Like I loved it. Actually, when I came in today, your daughter was up in a tree.
Was she?
I thought, isn't that beautiful, right? Yeah. She's not busy doing something. She's just being a kid. And I think that kids don't get to do that very often, right? And so, yeah.
This is all really fascinating. I keep talking about this because I keep trying to understand it, and I feel I'm an external processor, I think.
Right.
And so as I talk about this more, I'm trying to get at it. This is one of the reasons I wanted to do a tech fast for Lent, is precisely that. And I want to get you to flesh this thought out for me, because I think it's true, but I haven't really plumbed it at all. And that's this idea that the cause of our pacifying or regulating is also the cause of our agitation.
Right.
So, as you say, you turn to the phone, you're reading things on Twitter. A lot of it's like hyperbolic and loud and angry. You listen to a podcast, and it might be a political podcast, or it might be about what's wrong in the church, continually agitating yourself. And it's almost like, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not sure, but it would seem to me that we turn to this thing to soothe the agitation.
Right.
And it's just this vicious cycle where it agitates us more and we feel the need to go back to it more, and we're just caught in this thing. What do you think about that?
No, I would definitely agree with that. I would say we are, again, just, constantly stimulating ourselves. And so we're not, getting in touch with nature. We're not having time to really pray, right? We're not having time to reflect ourselves, to even go inward and know ourselves. We're just, like you're saying, constantly taking information in. And
I was just going to say real quickly, I think what's ironic about this, of course, is that people are watching this on YouTube and are like,
right.
So what do you do with that? I mean, obviously information can be helpful.
Again, I'm not
online.
Opposed to technology, and I'm not saying we should just destroy all technology. I think that it just needs to be measured. It needs to be in balance with the rest of your life.
I often will look at my, I use this thing called a monk manual. It's sort of just like a day planner, and you say the top 3 things you're going to get that done that day, and like how you can serve that day and things like that. And I sometimes will look at my day, I'm like, I don't have much to do. And yet I feel like it's filling up with things. Or not that I feel that it's filling up with things, but as I go throughout the day, I realize I'm always busy. Mm-hmm. But at the start of the day, I realize today I don't have much to do. And it gets to that point, I don't know if you ever heard this analogy of the sand, pebbles, and rocks. A priest told me this once, if you have a vase, the rocks represent the important things in your life, the meaningful things. Pebbles might be somewhat important, busy work, and the sand is just wasting your time. And he said what we often do is we don't, if you fill up the vase with rocks, then you can fit the pebbles in, then you can fit the sand in. Mm. But what we often do is fill up that vase with sand, meaningless busy work, and then there's no room for anything meaningful. Right. And I feel what I'm talking about is that. Like, I had a busy day today, but I did nothing that meaningful.
Right.
I've just been.
Yeah, and I don't know that everyone has even the luxury of that, right? A lot of people have situations where they have to be at a job at a certain time, mm-hmm. and then they have responsibilities, say maybe with kids, and then they've signed themselves up to a bunch of different things or activities, or they're running their kids around or whatever it is. They have a life that doesn't have time in it mm-hmm. for that downtime and for that connection with others. And by that, I mean true, real connection with others, right? Or time for self-recollection. So that's not built into their day. So if you were making your calendar, right? You might have more flexibility because, you're a creative type and you're working on all these things. You could do it later or earlier. Not everybody has that. But either case, do you sit down and say, as I'm looking at my week, I'm going to prioritize the time that I sit down in prayer. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put that into the calendar first. I'm going to prioritize the specific ways where I'm going to have connection with, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a friend, and I'm going to actually build that into my day. And then the other stuff comes in after. Now that's hard. That can be hard for some people to do if their lives are already overloaded. Let's
talk about anxiety. I had this thought, and I think what you just said partly gets to the answer to this. But sometimes I feel like we're all talking about being anxious, but we've had it in the United States, many of us, perhaps most of us, have had it, very well. If we lived 100 years ago, we'd be perhaps making a lot less money. We'd have, serious issues that we don't have to deal with today. Mm-hmm. So isn't it just kind of like a pampered, spoiled kind of kid who's complaining about being anxious when he's never really seen it hard? I think this is what some people talk about. We had these young men going off to war and they weren't whining about their anxiety flaring up or something. Right. Whereas today, what are we doing? And we're sitting around feeling anxious.
Right. Well, I actually do think that we do have higher rates of anxiety now for specific reasons. And if you compare people that, were growing up, say, in the 1930s or something, they didn't have high levels of anxiety. They had slower days, less responsibilities. In fact, the young guys wanting to go to war were bored, probably to some extent, right? They were looking for some excitement. They were looking for something meaningful and heroic to do in their lives. Maybe they, if they were on the farm or whatnot. I mean, it's a beautiful life, you could say, but it's a hard life, say, working on a farm, right? Or, they had a lot of time for self-recollection. They had a lot of time for connection with others. Right. In those days.
So this is getting back to what we're talking about here.
It is.
The predominant reason that we're feeling anxious today is this increase in technology use.
I would say so. And it depends.
I agree completely.
Yeah. But it's not just the technology.
What else is it?
It's that, think we live in North Atlanta, right? Mm-hmm. Well, North Atlanta is a very busy metropolitan city, probably like a lot of other ones, right? And people get in their cars and they, in the morning, to go to work, often driving an hour. Yeah. And in traffic. Then they go to work and it's, our workforce, it's very much driven by productivity. So it's, depending on the kind of work you're doing, it might be a lot of meetings, a lot of conflict, a lot of, stress and pressure. And then what do they do after that? They get into their cars and they drive another hour or so to get home. And then they come home and they've got busyness in their house, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's, now get one kid over here, get one kid over there. I mean, not everybody has kids, but even if not, the pressures, the time pressures on people are pretty extreme. I mean, even if you compare a desk, sometimes I like watching some old movie, right? And
yeah.
Even if it's not that old, 1980, what was that one with 9 to 5, right? And it had the three women and they were, anyway, and they were protesting their boss who treated them in horrible ways. But you looked at his, just a glance at the guy's office. His office had a desk with a phone.
That's fantastic.
Maybe a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And, somebody else did the typing for him, right? And you're just kind of going, wow, imagine going to work and that's your desk. You answer the phone, you have somebody type, letters and memos and things, and you call meetings. That's their world. Yes. It was simpler. So the more technology we have, we've actually made our lives way more complicated. Plus you add maybe a day like the one I was describing a moment ago. When does that person have downtime? Their bodies and minds and everything are in a chronic state of, I would say, fight or flight, right? We weren't designed for our bodies to constantly be staving off threats, because that's what anxiety is. It's the perception of some kind of a threat to the system. And so the mind, but also the body, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you might even perspire, you have adrenaline, you're actually getting ready to do some action, you're getting ready to run or you're getting ready to
deal
fight,
with the threat.
To deal with the threat. But driving your car on the highway isn't meant to be an hour-long stress fest where your body's in a state of anxiety. Even the guys who went to war, the traditional old-fashioned war, if we go way back, is, a lot of waiting. And then you got the two sides, two cavalries or whatever, and then they just go at it till everybody's dead and it's over. So it's an event, right?
Yeah.
And what changed in World War I was, for example, was trench warfare, where they're sitting there constantly in a state of anxiety, staring at each other for hours and hours and hours. And it's a different level of stress.
That's really, really fascinating. But again, this does get back to technology because, of course, cars are a product of technology.
Right.
And it was because of the automobile that we're able to now drive long distances, don't need to live where we work.
Right.
Man, I want to become Amish tomorrow.
Yeah.
I've said this before, that when I grew up, and it's probably similar for you in Canada. I think in Australia we were like 5-10 years behind technology in America. But when I grew up, if you wanted to get a hold of me or my parents, there were only 3 ways. You could write them a letter in the mail. You could call the phone that was bolted to my kitchen wall, or you could come and find me. And if I wasn't home, you could go up to the shops and see if you really needed to find me.
Right.
That's literally it. Can you think of another way?
Right. No.
I think that's it.
That's it. Or you shouted in the neighborhood.
Your
mom did.
You could shout, which would kind of fit into that third category of coming to find me. But like today, let's just think about the ways in which we're contactable. I'm actually wanting to do this just as a kind of experiment.
Right.
You have text message.
Right.
You have phone calls. You have voicemail. You have apps like Marco Polo. You have direct message on all of your social medias like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Can they contact you over Snapchat? Is that a thing? I'm too cool to be into Snapchat.
I think they can.
Email. What else? I mean, it's like you've got people are speaking at you from 1,000 different angles through 1,000 different means. And as technology has advanced, we're less patient. If I text you, you feel the need to text me back right away. People text like I'm speaking to you in the same room. Hey, Gerry, what's up? And if you don't reply right away, I'm like, whoa, didn't reply my text message. And so we're walking around like with all these different apps, having to respond to all these people.
Right. So that gets back to what I was saying earlier. Like we're over communicate, but we have less connection.
Right.
Real connection.
So let's talk about anxiety then, because I really do agree with you, and I think that this is spot on, that this has got to be one of the primary reasons we're experiencing a lot more anxiety today, is that we're on constant high alert. And as you say, it's anxiety is what? You said a response to
a perceived threat or a real threat.
Yeah.
And we don't always know the difference.
Yeah.
Right? Because if our body is responding to a perceived threat as if it's real, then we're going to have all the same symptoms. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
So we go into fight or flight all day long, often without even realizing it. It might not be extreme, but it's almost this chronic low-level anxiety that's going on all the time. And that's why I really do believe that we have an epidemic of anxiety and depression, because at some point your body is so tired from that you can slip into the opposite, right? Anxiety is being a high alert, and depression is being under.
That's what so tell us, we've spent a little bit talking about anxiety, and I want to continue doing that, but what is depression, just real quick?
Well, it's a complicated phenomenon, right? But it is also like the sense of loss of motivation, almost the sense of kind of malaise. You feel sort of stuck. It's kind of the body almost coming down, if you will.
So is this almost the inevitable result of prolonged anxiety?
Yes, right. Because your body is as it can be. It's not always. It's one way. And your body is overstressed over time. And eventually your body basically, because it's not designed to be in constant fight or flight. It isn't. That's not. Our bodies are meant to be temporarily in that state, and so it causes so much stress in the body, and the different hormones, and the different things that are chemicals and things that are going on in your body are just overwhelmed that it sinks into depression, so to speak.
So I would be interested to hear how you help people with anxiety, because it would seem like if our diagnosis is accurate and that technology is in large part due to the anxiety we're experiencing. Not always. Of course, human relationships with family members and things like that, of course, can play into it. But I would imagine that there would be two basic approaches. One would be to kind of help you live the same life you're living right now, but live it better. Be more responsible as to when you check your email, what media you take in, and so forth. Right. But sometimes I wonder if we should be a little more bolder than that and be like, you need to just...
Right.
Maybe we should be taking a more radical approach and just get off social media.
Right. That's not always practical, depending, in some cases it is. So to me, I have two different approaches. One is structural and systemic. So it is taking a look at your life and what are the changes that you can make in your life to live a better life. Maybe that means a job change if you're driving for an hour there and back. That's not always possible for some people. Maybe it is specifically adding things into your life and removing other things, right? So there could be like social media or whatnot, or putting serious limits. So those are all structural and systemic changes.
Okay.
The other kind of change is to actually recognize what's happening to your body and becoming more and more present throughout the day and recognizing the perceived threats, and then having some tools to be able to kind of deregulate or, kind of come down from the stress in natural ways so that you can have that ride. Maybe that drive for an hour, maybe you can't help it. You got to feed your kids. It's the only job, whatever. But maybe that hour drive can actually be a time of, to some extent, relaxation and restoration. Within limits in a car. Yeah. But rather
you
than
don't listen to talk radio, you listen to Gregorian chant or something more.
Definitely. But I think it begins with the body. I kind of have this formula, and I say, it starts with the body, then go to emotions, and then go to cognitions. So the very first thing one has to do is to recognize what is going on in the body in the present moment. So like right now, for example, I'm talking to you and we're doing a show, right? So immediately as an introvert, I could be stressed by that. So the first thing I have to do is sort of, okay, what's going on in my body? Right?
And what does that mean?
So am I tense?
Okay.
To start with, like, are my muscles kind of clenching, and where am I doing that? Is that in my pelvic floor? Is that in my shoulders? Is that in my hands, my jaw, wherever it might be? And then just stop for a moment and go, hey, I'm having that physical reaction, and yet nothing really bad is happening. I'm just sitting here with Matt. So I could just kind of like go, all right, invite my body to relax and go, you know what? Matt's a nice guy. I'm doing something I think is important. It's going to be okay. And then also adding to that, maybe taking a breath, which probably I should have done before now, right? And just sort of take a breath and just allow oxygen to kind of come in. And then I'm telling my brain, my body is literally sending messages up my spine, basically to my amygdala, that core, that part of the brain, that primitive part of the brain that manages fear and stuff like that initially. And it's literally sending the message, Gerry, you are safe right now.
You know what's funny? This is me being a little vulnerable, but last night I was quite stressed out. The kitchen was a mess. Everything felt like it was chaotic.
Right.
My children were kind of playing up a lot, and I was trying to get them to do things, and they weren't doing them, and ended up sending them to bed. And I just felt angry and tight. But I don't think I would have realized I felt tight had it not been for your help, back in the day. Anyway, Cameron, my wife, came upstairs and we talked for a little bit, and she said, go for a walk. And so I went for a walk, and I started praying the Jesus prayer, breathing from my diaphragm, not just short, shallow breaths, which is what you tend to do when you're upset.
Right.
And I actually... you tell me what you think about this. It's a little embarrassing to say maybe on air, but I actually said to myself, like, it's okay. Like, you're safe. You're safe. And I realized that anger was a response to a threat, and maybe that threat was, I don't know, like not being respected the way I think I should. Maybe chaos, around me was seeming like it was encroaching in on me. But just, it was actually more of a prayer experience. I was in the context of prayer. It was almost like my Heavenly Father saying to me, like, all is well.
Yeah.
All is well. And then all of the anxieties that I'd be like, yeah, but like the way I reacted to one of my children today, like that's terrible. I shouldn't have done that. Like, all is well.
Yeah.
And not in sort of a fatalist way. I mean, there's things I should perhaps need to change, but it gets exactly what you were talking about. And I realized I was all hunched up, and I'm like, okay, like it's okay.
Yeah.
So back to the body.
No, you did exactly the right thing. That's fantastic. You noticed your body.
This is so much cheaper than paying you for therapy. These cameras aren't even rolling. This is just a therapy session. That's a joke.
There we
Sorry.
go. Yes. Well, yeah, you did it. You started with the body, and you recognized you were tense, and you did something about it. You did some breathing. You did some muscle relaxation. You actually did an awesome thing. You went to the emotional center. You invited God into that space, which I think is beautiful and wonderful and really powerful. You allowed God to actually soothe the emotional part that was distressed. Then you actually went to the cognitions, and you were able at that point to go, hey, you know what? It's no big deal. I don't know exactly you said this, but it's no big deal. My house is messy. You're able to, like, I can manage that or whatever. You were able to actually resolve that part cognitively. But you wouldn't have been able to probably get there or not as well if you had skipped the body and skipped the emotional center and did what most of us do, is go right to the cognitions. But what happens there is that when you haven't had your body soothed or your emotional center soothed, then you're going to have a lot more critical thinking. Like, well, why, why are you so stressed? What's wrong with you? What's your problem? And it leads to more anxiety and makes the cycle actually worse.
So you said that, anxiety, we tend to respond to a perceived or real threat through fight or flight.
Right.
And you said that we're experiencing anxiety in higher degrees today than perhaps we did in the past. So would it follow then that we're also dealing with anger? Since I imagine that is often what fight looks like in a way that we didn't in the past, or not necessarily?
Wow, good question. It's interesting. Anger is a really interesting emotion, for one thing, because it can be what I call primary emotion. So our primary emotions are, they're not good or bad.
Yeah.
They're just what we feel.
Yep.
Shame, guilt, joy, sadness, hurt, all these different emotions are kind of the primary emotions. And anger can be when it's something where you have a righteous kind of reaction to something that's just wrong.
Yeah, you want to remedy something.
So anger is the emotion that one feels in that situation. What you do with that anger could be a number of things that are actually sinful or not.
It can also be clouding, though, can't it? It's
Right.
not just, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just what we do with it. It seems like there's a type of anger that almost clouds our reason.
Right.
So the good anger would propel us to remedy something that is in need of remedy.
Motivates us, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas now I call anger sometimes can be a secondary emotion. It's the only one that I kind of see that way. And that's when it's covering up another emotion.
Okay.
So if you hurt my feelings and I feel that just a little bit and I don't like that, so I quickly go to anger, then I'm like cursing at you.
Yes.
Right? That's then anger. That's anger as a secondary emotion.
Yeah, this is what was happening to me last night. I think and when I say angry, I wasn't shouting or hitting anything or, kicking the cat or the dog, not that I did that, but I wasn't doing anything like that. It was just, I was feeling angry and I realized that it was a way of protecting this fear that things are out of my control and not well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But see, you named it there, fear.
Yeah.
So fear is another, I didn't mention it, but fear is another primary emotion. Nobody wants to feel fear. So you go from fear quickly to anger.
Yes.
Men do it more than women, I think, because we're almost trained that it's okay.
Huh.
Anger is one of those, you shouldn't cry, but if you're angry, you're a guy.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
On some level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, earlier we were talking about how you might help somebody who's experiencing anxiety, and you began by talking about experiencing their body and things like that. So why don't we just use a real life example that might be helpful for people? All right. Let's suppose there's a lady, just choose a lady, and she goes online and maybe she's just posted this video that she's very proud of, and she has several remarks in the comment section that are saying she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's an idiot. She's fat. She looks stupid, or something like that, which, believe me, is what people get on YouTube. What do you say to her? How is she to encounter that? Let's say she's not in a position where she can shut down YouTube. It's part of her job.
Right.
How would you kind of counsel her to deal with those negative comments coming at her?
Right. Well, a lot of different ways one could approach that. Just following what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
First of all, what did she feel? Because I would imagine that perhaps, unless she's just so used to it that nothing bothers her anymore, I would imagine that her feelings were hurt. I would imagine maybe she even felt some shame, right? So she has some hurt feelings, some shame feelings. Maybe she's a bit fearful too. Maybe she feels like her livelihood or what she's doing, whatever is threatened. I don't know. So those are really difficult emotions. So she may have suddenly felt those things. Now, giving some space to allow her to feel those things is honoring her and honoring that she's allowed to have those emotions, right? And that's a really helpful thing for her to do. What she might have done in response, right? Because nobody wants to have shame, fear, or hurt feelings. What she might have done is to get really angry. Maybe she snaps back and types in something nasty back, right? That's an expression of her anger. And in a way to help her understand that's why she did that, right? So not really judging it, but just helping her see, okay, you had hurt feelings. You didn't feel them. You went to anger, right? So now let's go back and look at, well, what did you really feel? And then to allow some process of her to be able to have some care and understanding to who she is as a person, right? And once she gets that kind of maybe soothing or understanding, and I even go into other areas when I'm doing therapy and looking at kind of what part of her was particularly hurt by it. So in other words, she might have a part of her that was, kind of tough and stands up and says, I don't care what you think, right? But usually behind that's covering up probably another part that was wounded in the past. Maybe it was being bullied as a kid, or maybe it was her dad saying she's stupid or she's fat or something like that. And that wound from way back, which has been very well, buried, and is finding a way out, is now fueling her reaction, right? And so she's not really realizing it. It might be in her subconscious or that right side of the brain. She just knows she feels stronger than she really wants to. So if that's going on, spending some time with that part of her, recognizing where it comes from, maybe doing some therapeutic work with that kind of, if you want to say, inner child or that wounded part, and to help give that part what it really needs. Because if you're 9 and your dad says you're stupid, you're fat, you're ugly, or something like that, what does that 9-year-old really need that they didn't get? Right? They need affirmation,
gentleness, love.
Yeah. And so when you speak even the present, that part is still present in her. So when you in the present take care of that part, and she's affirmed in terms of who she really is. You are beautiful. You are wonderfully made by God. You are brilliant. You've done amazing things in your life. It's not just coddling. It's not just having her do an ego trip. It's speaking truth. And when that is experienced, guess what happens to that stupid comment?
What?
It's like, that's just somebody's pettiness. That's just some broken person who is venting their woundedness out online.
See, this is why you're the therapist and I'm not, because I think I would have went, when I was saying like, what should she do, right? I'm looking for a prescription. Like you do this, this, and this. But I love what you did there. You were like giving this person space to feel that way.
Yeah.
That's really, that's impressive. Yeah.
And that only happens in connection.
What does that mean?
That means she could be brilliant and have some divine moment and go in prayer and have all that take place somehow. Hey, God does do that, I believe. But going to a therapist to work that through, you're having a connection with a therapist. It has to be someone you trust. They're not going to BS you or just, coddle you or whatever, but they are speaking truth to allow that to unfold. Right? And so that she can get to that place that we were just describing.
Now, you use the example there of a father who speaks to her or someone when they're 9 and how are they going to respond. What about prior to our memories? Like I can think back till I'm about 5, maybe 4, and then it gets really fuzzy. Yeah. I'm getting into attachment theory here. Yeah. So how important are those first few years? Maybe is it possible, and I imagine the answer is yes, that I might be acting out of a wounded place that I'm not even conscious of?
Definitely. Those first few years are crucial. They're essential. They talk in attachment theory. They talk a lot about the maternal gaze.
Can we just pause? What is attachment theory?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a theory that was pretty much developed by different psychologists, Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, and various theorists. I want to say in the 60s, I believe. And into the 70s and onwards. And it really is looking at how humans attach to each other and how connections are formed and what makes up good attachment. And when there isn't good connection and attachment, and how it creates insecurities, and then therefore how even a child responds to that insecurity. So the very early studies were done primarily with children and infants. And as time progressed, they realized, wow, how it informs the person's whole life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the maternal gaze. What's this?
Yeah. So think about the mother and child. And I love the icon.
We have one right here of the Theotokos. And
I don't know if you can zoom into that or want to pull it out. But if you look at that icon, and I can see
Would this be possible in this moment that you throw up an icon, Neil, so that we can look at it on the screen? Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. If you look at this icon, look at Jesus' lips and look at Mary's lips.
Very close together.
Yeah. They're attached. They're almost creating one face.
It's almost like her mouth goes down where her...
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And the beauty of the mother and child connection, right, is that it's nonverbal. There are no words. I don't know how old this Jesus is in this picture. They tend to make them look a little older, but when it's a baby, there are no words. So everything that is communicated is done with the body making that connection with the eyes, and the physical embrace and the physical connection and care. So what that child feels is security. The child is completely vulnerable. The child's needs the child's able to express all of its needs, and the mother provides it, or whoever the caretaker is, right? The mother provides whatever is needed, right? The child, and there's a responsiveness to need, right? If a child cries, the mother is there to figure out, does he or she need more food? Does the diaper need to be changed? Do you just need to be held, right? So that is really the core of secure attachment. And what happens in time, right, is as the child starts to grow, they have a sense of confidence because they've experienced good, healthy, secure attachment. And so in some of the studies, they look at, how does a child respond to a stranger just showing up, right? Does the child fearfully run to the mother? Does the child, just go off with the stranger randomly, right? And all these different responses indicates a different level of insecure attachment or some kind of problem in attachment.
So to talk a little bit more about the science, because I imagine this is a difficult thing to prove. You don't want to say to like 10 mothers, don't attach with your children, don't smile at them, or see how they fare, and then you mothers be super involved with your kids and we'll see how they fare, and then we can look at this group and this group. That would obviously be unethical. So how is this working?
Yeah, I mean, these are studies that go back, and I'd have to pull them out from my old, goes back, they literally did the stranger danger studies, and they had mothers sitting in a room with a child, and then a stranger literally walked in, and they just observed how the child reacted.
Interesting.
In those studies, and then they did so many of those, they were able to, come up with their theories and understanding. And so insecure attachment, right, means there's some insecurity. And most of us develop insecure attachments in life because we don't spend our whole childhoods and adult life, bonded with our mothers and like the mother and child there. So we have wounds, we have hurts, we have things that take place that cause insecurity. But the ways that we typically respond negatively to insecurity, so when the world doesn't feel safe, or when we realize I can't trust someone, maybe I can't trust my parent, maybe there's something so frightening in the environment, it causes me to lose a sense of trust and safety, then we typically have two responses. There's many more, but two bigger category responses. One is to be withdrawn. We avoid. So if things aren't safe, we hide, like we just separate ourselves in some way. The other response is to become anxious. So we're reactive. So anything that happens, we're especially nervous, or we read a lot into it, and we become, super, fearful, right? And sometimes we switch between those, right? And some people are more dominant in one or the other. But
controlling, would that be? I'm thinking if one side is to retreat, would the other side be more to control?
Yes. Yeah. You have to always, because your environment in some way at some time was not safe, I have to control my environment at all times, right? So, and if you think about relationships, so if my primary relationships from childhood or whatnot were not safe, and I didn't feel like I could trust others, then I'm going to spend my time, like as a married person, I'm going to spend my time trying to control and manage that other person in order to feel safe. Right. And so in some cases, that looks like a pursuer. Sometimes they say like an emotionally focused couples therapy, which is a type of therapy I've been trained in and love to use. We teach couples to recognize when they're being the pursuer, which is that kind of more anxious style, or when they're being they're withdrawing, which is that avoidance style. And so we train them to recognize that pattern as it's happening. So, because obviously if the person, let's say it's the wife, because it often is pursuing and controlling and reactive, and what is the guy going to do? He's going to avoid, withdraw. He might tolerate some of it or placate or whatnot, but mostly he avoids. So as he's avoiding, what does she do? She gets more anxious, right? And the more anxious she becomes more. So it just perpetuates a negative cycle.
Yeah, that is very interesting, because when you often think of a father who feels like he's failing at his job, it's because of one of two things, right? He's either blowing up at everybody, he's got an anger problem he can't seem to control, or he becomes passive and sits and watches football all weekend, doesn't engage.
Right. I would argue that the blowing up, the anger problem, is still part of the withdrawn aspect, because even though let's say it's a guy, because it can be a woman, but let's say it's the guy and he is withdrawing and avoiding, he's still experiencing a lot of emotion. He's just keeping it suppressed.
Yes.
So even though she's yelling at him maybe, and he's acting like he's not fazed, he is. There is a high emotional reaction internally being suppressed. And at some point it explodes.
So retreating looks like the person doesn't care.
Right.
But if he didn't care, he wouldn't be retreating, is what you're saying, maybe.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so, I mean, there might be people listening today and they think, well, crikey, I've had a terrible... crikey, if they're Australian. I've had a terrible childhood, maybe. Or that I didn't know my mother or father. Things like that. Like, am I doomed to this life where I'm...
Right. No. So it's beautiful. I believe God has designed us for connection. I mean, it's hardwired, from the point of birth and so on. But he's also, our brains are amazing and the way they can adapt. And as human beings, we can adapt. So the goal is to find corrective emotional experiences and new forms of attaching that are healthier. So I've never had a couple come in for marriage counseling and they're just like perfectly securely attached. It just doesn't happen. I don't know that there are couples who are perfectly securely attached out there very often, right? So once they recognize their insecurities and that that's where it's coming from, and it's not just the other person is trying to make their lives miserable, right? And they start to recognize the pattern, and they're starting to see, okay, together we have to do something different. And the different thing we can aim for, the therapist should be helping them get to, is secure attachment. So this can be learned, even in adulthood. So you can learn how to be more vulnerable. You can learn how to have more empathy. You can learn how to respond differently to your spouse. And if together the goal is the secure attachment, then you've got something to fight for and something to work toward, right? And my experience is actually that when couples come in for counseling, often they're coming in with the same issues. We have poor communication, issues with our kids, issues with money, and issues with sex. So those are the biggies that people are coming in for. And if you can imagine, if the relationship is fraught with a lot of insecurity, avoidance, and anxiety, and that cycle, all of those problems are very difficult to manage, right? Because you're freaking out over all these issues, or you are just tuning out, one or the other, but it's not going away. But when you have a relationship that is secure, where you feel like the other person's a safe haven, that they are just, you go to them with your heart, and they're not going to crush it. You go to them with what is deeper going on inside of you, the painful things going on inside of you. You're able to sit with those emotions I was talking to before, the hurt, the pain, the shame, the guilt, the sadness, all those fear even. And you're able to go to your partner and you're able to actually share those emotions, knowing your partner cares and is going to treasure that, right? They're not going to act insecurely to it. Like, they're not going to avoid it and just like dismiss you and who cares about your stupid emotions. They're not going to overreact in fear. Oh, what does this mean? Are we getting a divorce? Like they're going to, no. They're going to sit with it. Yeah. They're going to love you in that space. They're maybe even going to open up about their fears and hurts and pains and so on. And in that space, there's a connection.
Let me ask you then, how do you suggest for those listening who aren't necessarily going to couples therapy, though it might be a good idea.
Right.
How would you recommend that an argument take place? Because no doubt we have many husbands and wives who are watching this, and there's just that thing that's being brought up in their mind as you're speaking about something I said earlier, something she said earlier that we probably have to resolve. But whenever we try to resolve it, it always blows up. What would your recommendation be as to begin kind of addressing this issue, how it's best done?
Right. Well, it's a pretty big question, so I might need a specific example.
Okay, yeah, all right. I see what you mean, because it's going to depend on the people, the personalities, the harm that was done.
Right.
Yeah, it might be difficult to give a specific example. I suppose well, let's try and think. Suppose a man and a woman go to a party. I'm just thinking on the spot here. And, he says something rude to her and it offends her. And she looks at him in such a way that only he knows she's offended.
Right.
And they go on the rest of the night,
Right.
And he avoids it, maybe she avoids it, and maybe she avoids bringing it up because she just knows how it will end. It won't end well. He'll react this way.
Right.
And maybe she tries a few times.
Okay. I got you. No.
No. I'm still going.
Oh, okay.
Her name is Barbara. No, I'm just joking. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, okay. So he said something that offended her in some way at a public party, right? Is that what?
By the way, this is not something. This is not an example from my life. I've never offended my wife. You ask her.
Right. Yeah. And so she had a hurt feeling then, right?
Yep.
What I would be saying, okay, what was her? Even if she didn't feel it for long, what happened to her? Did she feel hurt? She maybe even felt shame, like her husband is publicly embarrassing her.
So, yeah, right. So my point, though, and what I want to get to, I want to get something real practical. Sorry to be such a man about it, but is that the man might want to ask her that, right? Like, I imagine like the argument is not always about what the argument's about.
Right. But I'm going to get to it because she felt something bad, right? She immediately went to, her reaction was giving him a look, right? When he got the look, right, he felt some things. Mm-hmm. Like he felt probably, shame and fear. Like, oh my gosh, my wife's going to kill me, in some way. Shame, like, I don't know, it might have been, I'm a bad husband. Mm-hmm. I'm like not successful or whatever. But then what does he do? What did he do right after that? Pretty
in this
nothing.
scenario?
Yeah.
Nothing. Maybe he just sort of resented her for it, which again might be that secondary emotion, right?
Yes.
Whereas like if I feel like I'm a bad husband, but I don't want to go there, then it's your fault.
So he expressed some kind of resentment. Now she avoided as well because she decided not to talk about it later. Mm-hmm. So what are they actually seeing of each other? They are seeing, one is seeing, he makes some kind of comment and then he avoids me. Mm-hmm. She's seeing, he's seeing like she is mad at me and she's avoiding me, right? That's on the surface what they're experiencing of each other. They're not communicating underneath that. He's not sharing his shame and fear. She's not communicating her hurt feelings and her shame. Because in a secure attachment, if she was to do that, if she was to pull him aside and just say, sweetheart, when you said that, you hurt my feelings. And that was just so embarrassing for me in front of people.
And if she said it in a non-accusatory way like that?
Then he's called to that. She's being vulnerable. He's called to look at her and say, I'm so sorry, honey. I will not do that again. I did not intend to. I was just trying to be funny and I was just stupid and I didn't mean that. You are amazing. And then she would have said, thank you. And it would have been over. Right?
Yes.
But instead, all this other stuff happens.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how resentment builds and that's how all this negativity happens.
What would your advice be regarding this attachment theory with our children?
Oh yeah. Well, it's perfect, right? Like here, this is a great point, I think, to kind of go over some key elements that the research has shown that what comprises the essentials of attachment, of secure attachment. And these are the things you really need to foster with your children. And sometimes it's helpful to have these practical points. Yes. The first one is safety. I mean, there has to be safety, whether it's physical safety or emotional safety. So if there isn't that, if you're threatening physically your child or you're emotionally threatening, there isn't safety. All right. The next one is to really be seen and known. So if you think about it, this comes into the listening we were talking about much earlier. But when a child is seen, like children come up to you, Daddy, look at this picture that I made. Yeah, look at this. Look at me in the tree, right? This morning. And they're seen and they're saying, yeah, you're awesome. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Acknowledge me.
Yeah, I love this. And they look at it. So they're known. They're known. They feel known. All right, so being seen and known.
So let's just pause there. When a child comes up and says, hey, Dad, watch me do this. Hey, look at this. Yeah. What are they actually saying?
See me.
See me.
Know me. They want. They're looking for affirmation.
My goodness.
Yeah. I am important. I'm important enough to be looked at. I'm important enough to be cared for. And so on, yeah.
Okay.
The next one is the ability to be comforted, or soothed. So when that's present, a child knows that if they hurt themselves, they can go to their parent and the parent's going to take care of them. And they're going to do it in a comforting, safe way, right? And it's amazing that sometimes doesn't happen, right? If we don't go up to somebody.
I mean, I screwed this up the other day. My son was on a longboard coming down the road, and he fell off and he hit his head.
Right.
And I have told him about the importance of wearing a helmet, right? So
Right.
when I'm driving, I see him on the side of the road crying, I got angry with him. I didn't
Right.
stop. I didn't soothe him. I didn't even... I just was like, Liam, I've told you to wear... And meanwhile, this poor kid's crying. I take him home. I drop him off.
Right.
And that's how the story ended. We were driving out, and my daughter, Kiara, said... And she's so sweet. She's like, Dad, I just think it would have been better if you had have first said... I'm so sorry, and then told him about the helmet. I'm like, you are 100%.
She's going to become a counselor someday.
She's brilliant. I mean, and then I felt shame.
Right.
And so I went and I bought him something. I came home. I apologized. I said, listen, I shouldn't have done that. I am concerned for you, and I'm sorry that happened.
Right.
And I didn't take that as another point to jump on the "but you should wear your helmet" thing. I felt that point had already been made.
But see, in that example, right, we can always retroactively fit things, and it's beautiful that you did go back and recognize it. That's just important. You're human. We're all human, and we know we have to know how to recover and repair, which is what you were doing. But yeah, in that moment, if the first reaction was, "Hey, buddy, are you all right? Are you safe? Let me see what's going on with your head," whatever it is, soothing, caring, then he would have felt that soothing and comfort. And then, right, just like your daughter said, you could be able to say, I am it, and actually go more to your feelings, not so much, I told you not to do that. I told you to wear your helmet. It would be more powerful and effective, and to stay in that secure attachment place to say, when I see you on the road without your helmet on, or when I see you making a left turn across the road where a car might be coming.
How do you know about this?
I don't know.
Did you see him do that?
Yes.
We'd be telling him not to do that as well.
Right.
I'll get angry about him at it later.
I am fearful.
Yeah.
I care about you. Your life is important to me.
And so not only is that more helpful in the sense that it's received better, but you'll actually probably get the outcome.
Well, yeah. When you're just mad emotionally, then what is it teaching him? It's teaching him that he's powerful. His behaviors have the power to make you be completely emotionally dysregulated and off the wire, right?
Yeah.
But when you say, I am fearful, I love you, you are precious to me. If you are hurt, and God forbid killed, I will be crushed. And I need you to wear your helmet.
Yeah.
That sends a completely different message. Mm-hmm. And it's not always that he's going to obey just because you say it that perfectly, but I think it has a better chance of success. Plus, it teaches him a healthy way of recognizing other people's feelings and emotions.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had soothing, that was the third one. Being seen, I believe, was the second.
Safety, being seen.
Safety,
known,
seen, known,
and then being
comforted.
Yeah. Another one is that I think is just amazing, is to be delighted in or to be valued, right? And so when you just look at your child and you say, I just think you are the bomb. And it doesn't matter what they have done. So it's not tied to behavior.
It's not a reward.
It's not accomplishment based. It's just you as a person are delightful to me. And when I see you doing things, I'm going to recognize the doing that's there. But it's more about I recognize your being. And that is something you sometimes is absent even in families that provide everything else. Right? And so you can be a good provider.
Safe.
Yeah,
it's a safe
you can be
place.
Generally comforting, like they're not going to kick you to the curb if you crack your head, right? You can generally, and all those things, but they don't feel that level of connection. You know, it's funny because when I work with clients and I tie this to God, because this is where we end up
my son
going.
in whom I'm well pleased is what immediately came to mind.
Exactly. Jesus needed it. Jesus, and guess what? The two times that God says to Jesus, you are my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, was his baptism before he starts his public ministry, and the transfiguration before he does his passion. So he hadn't earned it yet.
Wow.
He was just simply delighted in.
Yeah.
And so the accomplishment comes from the affirmation.
Oh, that's powerful.
The actions are not what the person's trying to earn love and delight, right? It's the other way around. And so many people get this wrong in the relationship with God. But I do believe God just simply delights in who we are.
Yeah, I think I've shared this with you. You know, my son Peter will be like, "Come and jump on the trampoline with me."
Right.
And I might, if I'm in the middle of 100 things, think of that as to be like a nuisance. You know,
Right.
like I'm busy. You know, like I'm busy cleaning up your stuff. You know, that you've done here or something.
Right.
But if I can hear him, I think to myself, what does he mean by that when he says like, "Daddy, come"? What he's saying is, it would be better if you were with me.
Yeah.
And when you hear it that way, you're like, "Oh my gosh, of course I'll come."
Right.
Because he could go and jump down there,
Yeah.
but it would be better. And what a beautiful thing it is to have a son who thinks it would be better to have you with him than not.
It's fantastic.
Because there might be a point where that's not the case.
Well, if they're constantly told, "Get out, I'm busy," then they're going to, at some point, they'll stop asking.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then they're now just withdrawing. So it creates that insecure attachment that we were talking about.
So, anything after delight, or was that?
Yeah. The other one is that you cultivate where you an experience where you care about what happens to that person. You want their best interest. So I want to encourage you to be the best you can be.
Mm-hmm.
So the parent, in this case, is always wanting their child to be their total best, right? I mean, I can say my mom did that really well. Whenever I was interested in something, she went miles to cultivate that. Right? She would buy the magazines or books to support it or encourage me to do this and that. It's because she saw something in me. She was delighted in me, but then she wants me to be my best. And think about couples, right? If all these things are true for couples, they need to be seen and known. They need to have safety. They need to be encouraged. They need to be encouraged to be. If you want the best for your spouse, right? It doesn't mean you're always going to have it right, but they know that's what your motivation is. It's powerful.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, here's what I want to talk about, because very often in conversations like this, we're talking about wounds we have may have received that are kind of preventing us from living a fuller, more beautiful life, and how to deal with some sort of traumatic event that took place. What I don't hear us talking enough about is advice given to those who are producing the trauma in other people or are hurting other people. Because I have no doubt that we have parents who are listening to this, and you're going through that list, and just like I did, are thinking, "Oh my goodness, I screwed up on that one, I screwed up on this one," you know.
Right.
And I'm not sure if saying something like, "Well, you know, we're all human," it doesn't really help, because I know what it's like to experience pain from, say, my father or my mother,
Right.
and them being like, "Hey, you know, I'm just human," is like, yeah, that doesn't help me. And there may have been people who are watching right now who have done all sorts of atrocious things, like things that we would consider like abhorrent, even things like sexual abuse or theft or murder even, or paying someone to kill their unborn child. What do we do with that?
Right. Wow, that's a great question. And it's a difficult one. But I would say that I would look at what is the behavior that person is doing that's so negative, and ask the question. I'll start by asking the question, when was that your only answer or the only solution to a problem?
Okay, hang on. Which behavior?
Whatever one. So pick one. So if somebody is doing something atrocious, like they yell and scream and slap their kid, really harsh,
yes,
in a horrible way.
Yeah.
Well, when was physical violence their only answer? And I would explore that. I would want to go back to, when did that start? Because most people learn these negative behaviors as a way where either the mind, right, and soul are trying to solve something. And that maybe worked and maybe was not healthy, but it kind of worked at some point. And so they learn that behavior. That becomes their new adaptation, and it's negative, right? And so, and these different examples you gave are all a little bit different, and you kind of have to look at them for what they are. But in other words, okay, let's say a bully. So kid is being slapped around at home. So they're being, to some extent, physically abused at home. So why do they become a bully in the playground? Right? We know that this is usually the case.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They don't know how, when you're 9,
Yeah.
you don't know how to handle the fact that your parent is physically abusive to you. That's the safety one. The safety one is not there. That's the first one. If you don't have safety, you don't have secure attachment, right? And so this child doesn't know what to do with not feeling safe. So in some way, they have to find an outlet to get out whatever aggression they feel, whatever issue, right? And so they learn that if I have power over another person, so you pick some smaller kid or whatever on the playground and you beat them up, that I feel better. On some level, I'm at least doing something with all my bad feelings, right? It's not a good thing, but that was an answer to them at that time.
Gotcha.
Right. And so now they have learned and they carry it on in their life, and physical aggression becomes their answer.
So I'm thinking of we're probably all thinking of a particular bully from school. Maybe we were that bully. I wasn't. I was often picked on, and I'm thinking of one person in particular. I don't know whatever happened to this person, but I see what you mean. So for them at that point, this answered something.
Yes.
Like it worked. It didn't.
Yes.
It wasn't a good thing they were doing, and it would have worked much better if they had have handled it differently. They didn't know how to. They chose not to. Whatever. Right. It worked. They grow older, and this is a behavior that they're carrying.
Yes.
And they get to a point where it stops working. That is to say,
well, they get arrested.
They get arrested.
They go to
their
jail.
Life falls apart. Their wife leaves them.
Yes. And then they're stuck, and they don't know how to resolve it. Right. And that's where I come in. Right. Because I have to kind of figure it out. Go back and figure out. We have to address the 9-year-old inside of them that needed something different. That didn't ever receive it. And until that person receives that, then it's not going to change.
Yeah.
Right? And they might find enough, if they're totally restrained in some way or they're prevented from doing the behavior, they're going to find some other way maybe or another outlet. Right? And it may still be negative unless they're helped.
This is kind of getting us into the area of addiction, which I want to talk about. But before we do, I suppose, just kind of get back to that initial point that I raised, like what do I do with my own shame for having done this or that to this or that person, knowing that they have to experience their own path to healing.
Right.
Like I was pretty awful to my sister, like I teased her a lot. I made fun of her. And I think about that and I feel shame, and I've repented of that. And I suppose what do we say? But thank God for the cross, right? We have the divine physician who can heal us and forgive us of those things.
Right.
And at some point you have to surrender that to the Lord. But I guess if you weren't Christian, what do you do with the fact that you've been beastly to people?
Right.
Just try to get over
honestly,
it?
I think it is hard when you're not Christian
to
be able to resolve those things. So let's start there, though. You feel some guilt, right? You feel, I think, shame, I'm hearing, but actually, I think you're probably experiencing more guilt, right? I did something wrong. It might go to shame, right? Where it's more like, I'm just bad, but I did something wrong. So guilt is an important emotion because it motivates us, and it motivates us to change. So if you went to her and you said, I feel guilty. I did something wrong to you. I apologize. I shouldn't have. You are doing something reparative there.
Yes.
Right? You're acknowledging the emotion and you're creating a space. Now, if it's your sister and she receives it, then what's happening now? Possibly reconciliation, but you're restoring secure attachment with her.
Excellent.
So you're connecting with her.
So this is why it's so important that we repent.
Yeah.
I mean, Sister Miriam James shares the story about somebody who hurt her very deeply when she was a young girl.
Right.
And I don't think she'd mind me sharing this because she's said this publicly in talks, that she wrote to this person and this person completely denied it, which has got to be horrible, very difficult. But I see what you mean, that it's so important that we acknowledge our own sin, repent of it in order to, when possible, secure that attachment.
Did you restore the relationship with your sister?
Yeah.
So it was. You can still have some maybe lingering bad feelings about it that you even did that, but that's just a sign of having a conscience.
Yeah.
But you did something about it, and that is healing. And you created a new connection with that person. So it's beautiful, really. Yeah. That's not always possible, right? Because sometimes we hurt people and then they, like a parent or something. Yeah. Like I've seen people who, they didn't visit their mother who had Alzheimer's because for whatever reason, they just couldn't deal with it and it just hurt them too much or something like that, and the person dies. Now you're like, okay, I should have visited my mother. while she was alive, and now she's not, right? And so I feel all this guilt and shame around it.
What do you do with that?
Well, one thing, that is difficult. Again, you have to acknowledge the shame and the guilt rather than suppress it. So it's bringing that up. There are techniques around that. There's a classic, you call it empty chair. It's a form where literally you have the person talk to their mother, right? And you have them switch seats and become their mother and respond to them and this kind of thing. It's a very powerful experiential thing to help them at least have the opportunity to get those feelings out. And then, of course, if we have faith, thank goodness we have faith, because then you can go to God. You can go to you can pray for your mother. You can, pray to God for that forgiveness and so on, and actually receive that from God.
One of the things I found really a blessing in the spiritual life is sort of like acknowledging the forgiveness that the Father has given me and surrendering it, because it's not a matter of me talking myself into feeling good about the fact that, yes, I hurt this person or that person, but I've restored it, so I shouldn't be feeling that, and here's why. Sometimes you're going to have feelings. Feelings come and go. They fluctuate. So I think sometimes it's important just to say, kind of regardless of my feelings, not that we shouldn't acknowledge them and see what's going on there, but to say, like, I praise you, Father, that you've forgiven me, and I surrender this person to you whom I've hurt, and trusting that you'll bless them.
Yeah.
So standing in that sonship and that forgiveness.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. Another thought I had is that we do have to some extent, learn to tolerate our brokenness.
Yeah.
We can't just fix everything. That's really not in our power. We make mistakes and we have failed. And on some level in time, we can do reparative work. We can make amends, various things. But at some level, we just have to surrender to the fact that I'm just not perfect. Mm-hmm. And I can strive to do better always, right? And I can work towards sanctification, but I can't live in the should have dones, would have dones, could have dones.
Jacques Philippe has that beautiful little book, Seeking for and Maintaining Peace. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. One of the things he says is all of the reasons we give for losing our peace are always bad reasons. That is to say that there's not actually a reason that's a legitimate reason for losing our peace. Right. So if I've sinned, if something's been done against me, he's not shaming people who feel disrupted, but his point is, like, the Father wants us to sit in that sonship, because only with a peaceful heart can we then see things clearly too. And
right.
I want to get on to addiction, because one of the things you just brought up, which I thought was excellent, was someone's a bully and it worked for them in a sense, and now it no longer works for them. And that really did make me think of addiction. And I want to talk specifically about porn addiction, because I think this is something a lot of people are experiencing, or sexual addiction. So maybe talk about that.
I'd love to. And I'm going to connect it up too to everything we talked about, because I see porn addiction as an intimacy disorder. So I see it as a disconnection with others, ultimately with God, but with others, right? And so what is porn really, right? It's the illusion of connection. So we are, if I am let's pick on 9-year-olds. If I'm a 9-year-old boy and I feel disconnected, right? Like whatever the family situation is, maybe dad's always working and traveling and I never see him, and mom's very distracted or something like this. And maybe I'm awkward, maybe I'm, struggle socially, and, I don't have good friendships, and I live a lot of isolation, whatever. Well, and then pornography somehow is discovered, right? So let's say it's on the internet. Well, what is the pornography saying? Well, the pornography is saying, I see you, I know you, I can comfort you, and the illusion of I have your good in my mind, in my mind, right? And all those elements of secure attachment are given through pornography, but an illusion of secure attachment. So if the person feels like, I'm never seen, well, the pornography always sees you, in a sense.
It meets you where you are. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. If you look at other kinds of sexual addictions, I find it helpful to compare it in broad sweeps to kind of make the point. What is the guy who's a peeping Tom? What's he doing? He wants to be let in. No one lets him in, and so that he can see into another, right? Because the other side of being seen is seeing, because the other person is receiving you seeing them.
Yes.
Right? And so if this person has a deficiency, is never allowed in to anybody's heart, so to speak, then the peeping Tom is actually trying to get in. Then the opposite. What is the voyeur? The trench coat guy.
Yes.
He wants to be seen.
Yes.
Right? Of course, these are extremely unhealthy ways to get these needs met.
Yes.
Right? And
but
they
it
develop...
is fascinating.
Yeah.
It is, especially I think it's very easy to sympathize with somebody who is struggling with an addiction or a disorder that you yourself have struggled with, do struggle with.
Right.
But if there's something you not at all struggle with, you can see it for what it is.
Right.
Right. As you say, the voyeur, it's oh my gosh, and it's easy to kind of make light of, I suppose, make fun of, but these are people in pain who are...
Absolutely. Those are more pathological, perhaps, behaviors, because they're just sort of more noticed. But it's just a way of expressing what all of us have as basic needs. And most people are not going to those kind of pathologies, but they're still doing it, or maybe even just on their computer screen. Well,
that's kind of what a peeping Tom is, in a sense, isn't it? Right? Let me in a sense. It's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's no, and especially you've got masturbation usually accompanies pornography. So there is actual pleasure being given. You talk about St. Thomas Aquinas saying pleasure is an important healing thing. Well, there's pleasures that are healthy and pleasures that are unhealthy, right? But it's still pleasure. To the brain, it's just pleasure. And this is one, actually, I usually describe this little cocktail that's very powerful, that comes together in the brain, that is remembered in the brain a certain way. And the cocktail includes some kind of pleasure, right? Illicit or illicit, some kind of pleasure, an answer to a problem, right? So if I'm a gambler, let's say, right? No, let's say I'm a loser. I feel like I'm a loser.
Okay.
I feel like my life's no good. I'm just a big loser in life. I go into a casino, right? And I just decide to play a game. All right, I play a slot machine. I win $10,000 suddenly. What has the brain just been told? A, it's pleasurable to win lots of money. B, you're a winner. So it answers the problem that's deepest in that person's heart. The deep lie the person holds is now countered through this activity. What about if I feel like a loner and I don't belong anywhere, if that's my problem? Well, what happens when I get asked to join a group to, smoke pot together? Suddenly, we're all smoking pot together. I suddenly belong. So there could be the pleasure of the pot smoking, right, tied with the I now belong. That's a powerful cocktail, right, that now the brain remembers. So even though, say, let's go back to the casino guy, even though the guy continues his night, ends up being in the whole $3,000 by the end of the night, his brain is still going, I want that feeling again. I want that feeling again. Because it answers his problem. But he's not consciously thinking this, of course, right? It's happening, I guess you would say subconsciously, it's happening in that part of the brain. So, and it's locked together.
This is really fascinating. In my book, The Porn Myth, I used an analogy of gambling for those wives who might be believing that if they were, pretty enough, bustier enough, more adventurous, then he wouldn't need porn.
Right.
And the analogy I gave was, here's why that's false. Suppose you know somebody who's addicted to gambling, and you think, oh, he's addicted to gambling. I'll help him. I'll give him a bag of cash. Does he go, thanks, I don't need to gamble anymore? No, because what he was after wasn't the money, in a sense. It was something else. And when someone goes to porn, they're looking for something else or that thing in a different way. Right. What do you think of that?
I do. I love that. But I think the other thing is an emotional state, right? So handing somebody the money might create that emotional state, but it might not, given that context. I like to get a bag of money.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think in the gambling, there's probably a piece that's a thrill.
Yes.
There's a risk and a thrill that then gets answered that's different than just somebody handing you an envelope. So it's the same, even the porn, there's probably also a component added to that cocktail, which is I'm getting away with something, and there's a little bit of an excitement and a thrill to that. So a lot of times, and that even can be fear.
Yeah.
So it could be the emotion of fear. And so, which is interesting because I find with a lot of guys when doing some processing of addiction, And I actually will help try to get them in a small way into that emotional state that they experienced when the addiction started. Just enough to feel it. And when I ask them where they feel it in their body, it's often in their chest and it's often fear. And so when it comes to something like pornography, it's fascinating. It's not real, like it's not in their groin. It's not sexual exactly. It's fear. So the masturbation, the pornography, and the visuals are connected with fear in some cases.
Yeah.
And it's a high. And so they're trying to get at that. They want a return to the emotional state they had in that moment, and that is something that has to be kind of taken apart before a person can. I think before a person can really recover.
Who wrote the book Unwanted? Are you familiar with this book? Neil, do you mind just kind of giving it a look up and let me know the author, because I don't want to get it wrong. But I've heard great things about this book. And one of the things I believe he says is, there are many genres of pornography. And when you go to pornography, you're looking up a particular genre.
Right.
If you just cease shaming yourself for a second and would just begin to ask yourself the question, like, why is it that it's this in particular?
Yep.
You might be able to start getting to the root of these things.
No, exactly. I do think that's
I'm not
key.
sure how helpful that would be without a therapist guiding you. It might be helpful. I'm not sure, but
right.
But yeah,
no, I think that's dead on right. There's a reason why there's a particular need being met by a particular type of choice.
I'm sorry, I don't have it. J something or other. J. Anyway, we'll put it below. That's what we'll do. We'll put it below. So it'll be in the show notes.
I would add more to it than just the particular thing. I would look at the fantasy. So whatever the entire scenario is, and that fantasy could be something you play in your mind. It could be something you look for in pornography or some kind of videos or whatever to act out, or even act out with other people. And so it's fascinating what kind of fantasies people choose and what is the dynamic at play in the fantasy. And sometimes even really violent type fantasies, they're disturbing. It's like, why would somebody choose to play that out or go look at that kind of thing on the internet when it seems violent or it seems demeaning or whatnot? And the way I look at that is that this will seem interesting or seem odd or paradoxical, perhaps.
Probably not, given what I've written about. But.
Okay, but they're seeking safety in that.
Yes.
So if somebody was hurt physically, right, or sexually in a very violent or physical way, then why would they then either put themselves in positions where they're being physically or sexually abused later in life? Or why would they look at porn that was very violent or very awful kind of thing? Well, why? It was because the brain wants to go back to resolve that problem that happened. Let's say if it was a childhood sexual abuse situation, the brain naturally wants to go back to it to resolve it, and it can't. And the way that it creates it turns to the pornography or the behavior is to form some kind of safety in it, because now I can control it. Right? And you talk about like people that do S&M and stuff like that and all this bondage stuff. There are some rules around it.
Yes. Right?
And all this. And so there is a sense of safety, even though I'm returning to something that is abusive. Right? And so that's why people reenact their traumas in various ways.
What's another example other than sexual that people reenact their traumas that you can think of?
Let me think. So, like, other than...
I'll give you an example, and if you can think of something, feel free to throw it out. But I'm thinking, obviously, many things are traumatic. Suppose a father leaves the family, and the child is traumatized. In that sense, does he reenact that, and what does that look like? Or is
Right. Well, it could be. It's complex, of course. In that case, he has a sense of abandonment, right? So I'd have to think about it some more, but it could be that he chooses to abandon in some way, but I actually know more likely that he puts himself into relationships where he gets abandoned. Okay. So it plays out over and over again in his life, and then he comes to therapy or something, and it's like, why do women always leave me? And we find out when he was 9, his mother left. And hasn't talked to her since.
With the sexual case, you talked about these like safety. Said there are some rules in these things. How is there safety in this as he's reenacting this? Is it just that he's withholding his heart from this person?
Right. It's complex. He's choosing like if he had a mother who left, let's say then, and then he chooses women who typically leave.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like safety.
Yeah.
But he's in some level, that's what he knows. So it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because a mother who
if she were to stick around, that
wouldn't feel safe. Yes, because it's getting him. He's having to experience the intimacy that he desperately wanted, but he's also deeply afraid of now. Right, so he'll pick women that are capable of that level of intimacy, so it's safe. But then they leave, and and the whole thing kind of plays out again. Right, so it would be important then. What would it look like for him to have a mother who stayed? And what would it be like for him to experience something of that and be able to tolerate that intimacy with her? Right? And so that might have to be titrated. Like that isn't just something you throw a person into the pool, the deep end with. Maybe the little levels of intimacy and safety and being able to experience that.
So given this discussion about trauma, addiction, and we can speak more about trauma later, what are some bad ways that people try to overcome pornography? Bad in the sense that they just don't work or they make the problem worse.
Right. Well, I think that they white knuckle it, right? So,
and what does white knuckle mean?
So it means I'm just going to use like the force of my will to just get over this. So I am going to be tough and I'm going to be good and I'm going to just stop this behavior and it will just go away in time, right? So, and then of course what happens is they haven't maybe put proper things in place for accountability, whether it's the Strive app or whether it's accountability groups or whatnot. Like they don't have anything in place to stop the behavior itself. And they haven't gotten at all to the underlying root of the problem, which we've been talking about, which is lack of intimacy and connection in life and some unmet need that needs to get met. So none of those things are there. They're just going to fail. And then what's worse is they're going to feel bad about it. So it's going to end up making them feel shame, further guilt, and it just that then fuels what's the point? I'm a big failure. I'm bad Catholic or whatever it is. And then they sink back into the behavior.
I also see, and I'd love your take on this, how we have tended in the past to over-spiritualize the issues of our sexual dysfunction.
Right.
So if you knew somebody who was say, struggling with an eating disorder, or who was gambling and their wife didn't know about it and he's eating up all the savings, you might talk about prayer, especially if you have an intimate relationship with the Father. You might get into that, like what is this getting at? But you would probably also say, are you seeing somebody about this? Is there some sort of group that you could attend?
Right.
But it seems to me that up until recently, and maybe even still today predominantly, we don't do that when it comes to things like when you act out sexually. I mean, you do because you're a therapist, but what I think most people often do is like we got to pray harder, like pray the rosary, go to adoration. And of course, neither of us are saying these aren't good ideas. But my problem is, I think when you over-spiritualize, this is very unhelpful. I met a woman who, several years ago, she came up to me and said that her university-age son was still struggling with pornography, that this is something he's been struggling with for years. And she talked about how she always takes him to confession, that he's praying the rosary, and all that's great. But I looked at her and I said, what's one non-spiritual, like specifically spiritual thing that he's doing? To help overcome this. And she looked at me like she didn't understand the question, as if what else is there?
Right.
And I think there's this fear that Catholics have, that if I say something like that, or if I question whether there's something else I should be doing other than praying, I'm somehow demeaning prayer, saying that God's not enough.
Right.
What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have probably a different take.
Okay.
I would argue that we have parts. I've mentioned that before. We have parts of ourselves. The way I say it's not split personality. There's a part of me that wants to go to the gym today. There's another part of me that wants to go
eat tacos
and watch. Well, I was going to say watch Netflix for several hours. Yeah. Wouldn't be tacos for me, but it's still something like that, right? So I have these different parts. Well, the part that wants to exercise is not a bad part. Obviously, he wants me to be healthy, right? Now, if I let that part of me rule me, then I'm exercising all the time and it's just insane, right? It's just too much.
Yeah.
If I let the part of me that wants to watch Netflix rule me or be in charge of me, then I'm doing nothing. I'm just lazy on the couch all the time. So what happens is I me, my own self, has to be in charge. And I have to be aware of my different parts.
When you talk about I, that's independent of the parts. Is that right?
Connected, but in a way independent. So it's my true self.
Okay.
And we can explore that later if you want to. But just to make the connection to what you're saying, what you were asking before quickly here, is that we have a spiritual part sometimes. So we have a part that acts spiritual. That's the good boy sometimes, the good spiritual boy. And he may be praying the rosary, and he may be doing his prayers, and he may be the good boy. And if that exists, right, it's not that it's bad at all, right? But when it is dominant, then it is everything, every solution is spiritual, rather than looking at my other parts that also manage things, important things. Like maybe that's the health part. The guy that wanted me to exercise, that part of me, exercise might actually be part of the solution. Maybe I need to get out some of my aggression. I need to be healthier. That is one part of the solution. But when the spiritual part is dominant, then every solution is spiritualized. And it isn't actually overly helping us necessarily connect with God at a deeper level. So here's the thing. We need to recognize that spiritual part, right? And say, okay, he's helpful because he does encourage me to pray the rosary and to do my prayers and to be a good boy. And there's nothing bad about that. So I recognize him. Hey, I like you, but let me be connect with myself, my truer self, with God, which is a deeper connection, because it really is with me and not a part of me that is just sort of managing life. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I look forward to delving into it. So it doesn't sound like though that you're disagreeing with what I just said.
No.
Just that you have a different...
Just a different way of looking at it. It's a deeper
way of looking at it. Yeah.
I like what you said.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think just to kind of help flesh this out, when you're talking about, okay, spiritual self, it's good that you're doing this. I think often what we mean, for those who might be tempted to misunderstand us here, is this is it's a spiritual veneer. It doesn't go deep. It's a surfacey sort of thing. Right. So it's not about connecting with the Father who loves me and me kind of sitting in that relationship.
Yes.
Rather, it's almost like we treat God as a vending machine. I give you a rosary, you give me a porn-free day, and that's the deal. Right. And we become more hung up on the mechanics of a particular devotion or way of praying than we are worried or interested in real intimacy with the Father.
And I'll take it another notch here. I bet that spiritual part has a complicated relationship with God that may not always be healthy. And so often these spiritual parts believe or have some kind of burden of belief that they must be good for God to love them. So what I feel like is powerful therapeutically is for the self, right? And we can get into how do you even access our real true self, but for the self to be able to say to the spiritual part what's true, because the self is created in God's image, and the self is how we act, and that is how we actually, it relates to the soul and how we actually access in relationship with God, right? And so Christ and the Holy Spirit can work through the actual self to speak to our spiritual parts and say, you don't have to work so hard. God actually loves you, loves us, the whole me here, loves you first. Let's connect that to delighting. God delights in you. You are one of his beloved sons in whom he is well pleased. And suddenly that spiritual part feels a lifting of a burden and actually becomes a much more helpful part, less rigid, less, fearful that if I make a mistake, if I don't say my rosary today, then everything's going to fall apart and God's not going to love me, or whatever it is, right? Whatever might be going on. Now, then let's take it another level. The spiritual part is learn to be that way to protect another wound.
All right. And here I want to just kind of step back and speak about these parts more broadly.
Sure.
Because no doubt there's been people listening to us like, spiritual part? Of course we have a spiritual part, but you're talking about something different.
Yes.
So, maybe just flesh this out for us then.
Yeah. So it's that idea. It's a notion, and you get it in. There's different psychological theories out there. One of them is internal family systems, which is the one I'm operating from primarily. Another one is, ego state therapy and that. So there's these different concepts that therapists that have learned these techniques have found them to be very powerful. I have found them to be extremely useful. And it's the idea that we have managers. Yeah. Right? So there's parts of us that just manage things. So, there's a part of me that is a really good doer, can be task oriented, get things done and all this, and there's another part of me, like, as much as I'm a kind of an introvert and don't really like small talk parties, there's another part of me that if, I was forced to go with my wife to a work party with people I didn't know, would just show up and smile and be friendly and kind of like be that part. And none of these are bad. Right? Now, so we have all these kind of managers, and some of these managers are protectors also. So they protect our wounded parts, right? So we were talking earlier about, that inner child who's wounded, that 9-year-old who was, who hurts hateful things from his or her own father, right? So those managers or protectors show up to take care of that, to take care of the wounded child, to prevent the painful emotions, the hurt, the fear, the sadness, the shame. The system doesn't want to tolerate those emotions, so those wounded parts get protected. Okay, and we're totally oblivious that this is typically going on, and these protector parts sometimes are really managing the whole show. And we kind of lose the self. So the self gets kind of like...
Yeah, I'm thinking of an example right now about the class clown.
Yeah.
He's not very good at school. He's embarrassed that he's not very good at school. But he's got a quick wit.
Yeah.
And that takes over.
Yeah, right. Because at some point, he got the message, I'm not accepted, people don't like me, or something like this, right? And so this class clown part, that guy learns, he must have you have to have some natural talent in it, right, to be funny. But when I'm funny and I put it on, I'm the class clown, suddenly everybody likes me, I'm accepted. It is an answer to the problem that I had before, right? So that I would see that as a manager part. So the manager is the class clown, so that's a part of him. There's a wounded part behind it, which is the kid that feels like nobody likes him. Right? So that's been protected because nobody wants to feel that level of shame, right? So this class clown's kind of, the way I view it is the class clown is kind of in front of the wounded part. So you can't see the wounded part. Shielded. Yeah, perfect. Right? And so what happens though when a person is the class clown all the time, then the true self that I was talking about is merged, if you will, or so blended with this class clown part that there's no longer much access to the true self, right? And so there, over time, it can create a situation, right, where you don't know who you are because your identity is now this class clown. Now, the class clown by itself is not actually a bad part, right? I mean, if he's a little separated from the self and looked at with a better perspective, and the self is able to manage him, then, hey, he's funny. He's witty, he's likable, he's great, but not 24/7, and not if this wounded part is unattended to, right, in the background. And I can actually connect that, if you want me to, I don't know if you want me to connect to addiction.
Let's do it.
Yeah, because I can do a whole thing with addiction. Because there's these parts that that are called sometimes firefighters. Okay, if you know anything about a firefighter, if your house is on fire, they don't care about anything. They'll like break your door down, smash your window, step all over your carpet, and take out the fire any old way. They don't care about your furniture or anything.
They have one purpose, right?
They have
That's
one
the point.
purpose.
Yeah.
So when, say the class clown is in some way like royally embarrassed, like something happens, I don't know, his pants fall down or something happens, or some new kid shows up who's funnier than him and makes him feel like a fool. Well, that part collapses. guess who's revealed?
And what collapsed? Is this the manager we're talking about?
This is a protector, manager part that is the class clown.
All right, so that bit
and he kind of collapses. Yeah. Well, guess who gets exposed? The kid who doesn't believe that he is worth anything, that anybody likes him, that he matters, that he's seen or known by anybody. This wounded part is suddenly exposed. So what has to show up to save the day is the firefighter. Yeah, exactly. So the firefighter shows up and takes care of business. And that could be, I'm going to drink myself silly, or I'm going to go to, some drugs or something. Or it could be, I'm just going to lose myself in video games or something, or pornography.
Could it be him reacting with anger towards this people who's exposed him and smack him in the face? Is that part of the firefighter?
Could happen.
Or not?
That could happen.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's actually less likely a firefighter so much as another part.
Okay.
That shows up.
Okay.
So we'd have to get to why that is. But
so the firefighter, sorry, you keep going. I don't want to cut you off. Well, I'm trying to understand. So the firefighter deals with the problem at hand, and he deals with that through
and that firefighter is an addiction. And when the firefighter takes over, it's like it hijacks the whole system to make sure that the hurt is not exposed. And it will do anything. And then, so the next day, whatever has happened, let's say he, hopefully he's older than 9, but he goes and gets drunk and, just totally binge drinks and blah, blah, blah. Well, the next day he probably feels bad, right? Because now his house is wrecked, right? And so the class clown might be sort of sheepish at this point, but there might be another part that is kind of going, you are such a fool. Why did you do that? Now you feel sick. And now you're stupid. And it's just sort of maybe a critical part shows up and makes him feel worse.
And that critical part has a role.
Yeah, we could get into,
So, I mean, to get back to one of your basic points here is we're not demonizing any of the parts. You're saying that the parts have a purpose. They have a role that they're playing.
Right. So the critical part could sound a lot like maybe an angry parent who's criticizing them. So why does an angry parent criticize their kids? Well, their intention, even if they're not doing it right, is discipline and to make their kids make better decisions, right? So the critical part, I hate calling it that, the part that is critical can be a part that is discerning, right? So when it is not overwhelmed itself, right, by the situation, when the self is present, then that part that is coming across so negative and critical could actually be used to be like, hey, we need to make better choices here. This is unhealthy for us, blah, blah, blah. So that it's a discernment part, not a critical part.
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then so getting to the true self, like acting from what?
Yeah.
So and if you weren't a Christian, I mean, what's your true self?
Right.
You're a Catholic therapist, and so you help people see who they are before God.
Well, you know what's amazing about this? And I'm still learning, so and thinking philosophically about these questions, because I find this way of helping people and looking at it extremely helpful. But the guy who actually developed internal family systems, he actually was working with trauma survivors, and he wasn't working I don't believe within any kind of Christian take on that, right? And what he found was that when he did this kind of parts work, because he was the one who was kind of discovering it, what he found is when you separated them from their parts, in a sense, you got perspective on the parts, a true self always emerged.
Interesting.
And the true self always had certain characteristics. And the characteristics were things like compassion, wisdom, clarity, calm, all these positive characteristics of the true self. When he found that it wasn't that way, it was a part showing up. Wow. But the true self always had those good qualities. And I believe that speaks to the universality of the fact that we're created in God's image. That as a human person created in God's image, we actually have human characteristics that separate us from animals that are in fact given to us in a divine way. So that is what connects us to God. All the things that humans do, like, creative. Like when we're in touch with our true self, we're creative and we're caring and all these kind of things. And it's beautiful. And when we act from that place, it's just simply healthier.
This sort of reminds me of Augustine and then Aquinas' kind of commentary on what evil is, that evil isn't something in addition to being, it's a perversion of being, it's a twisting of being.
Yeah.
So to this person's point, he sees something, he notices it's critical, it's not the true self, it's something that's been distorted.
Yeah. Exactly. And these parts, right, can be burdened with negative beliefs, like which are essentially lies, can be burdened with trying to adapt in some way, but not knowing any other way to do it, right? And so when the self isn't connected to that, isn't in charge of the whole, I say, he's the orchestra leader, right? If he's not there, if he's not present, then it's just the tuba player being really loud, you know?
Yeah.
It's not, and not, there's no overall direction and everything. Right. And that true self, in my belief system, says God works through the true self, right? God isn't really so much working through a part.
Yeah.
Right? The parts are just doing what they know how to do, and they need to be connected with the self.
We've touched upon trauma several times right now. I wanted to ask you what is meant by trauma.
Yeah. So trauma isn't necessarily the big capital T things. You know, the big capital T ones would be sexual assault, war, traumas. Those are the really, plane crashes, things like that we think of. I think of, and those are all relevant and they all relate to what we're talking about. But I think of the small t traumas. So those are all the wounds that we receive in this world because we are in a fallen world. So that could be the bully who picked on you. That could be the parent who, was unhelpful in the way that they disciplined, or whatnot. It could be a number of different things. And people respond to sometimes the same trauma in various ways. Right. So we're all a little bit different. And some people are able to, for whatever reason, because they've been given the tools or whatever, adapt in healthier ways to trauma. And some don't.
How would you define trauma, though? Like, what is it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a tough one, but to put into words directly, but it's a wounding.
Okay.
It's a we'll connect to everything we've been talking about. It's a disconnection. So is it
primarily an event?
Well, it can, it's some kind of event.
Or things.
It could be some one-time event that was just very painful and difficult. So a car crash where your mother dies and you're in the car. That's a one-time major big trauma. But it could also be years of chronically being told you're stupid. So I would even see that as a form of trauma. So and ultimately the definition I'm going to work with today, because there's been lots of definitions and I have to kind of go on the spot, but would say something that disconnects us and causes us to feel unsafe and unable to trust.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we need to be healthy. What we need to be healthy is to feel ultimately connection, safety, and trust in God.
And so, I suppose this is pretty fair to say too, that someone can experience a traumatic event that is objectively worse than some other traumatic event,
right?
And yet it could be subjectively less traumatizing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think this is what often happens. A person receives something traumatic, and someone else, maybe something objectively is less so. Sexual assault versus being bullied as a child, say, depending on the level of bullying. Yep. Whereas the person who's been bullied, this may have had a more negative effect on them than the other person.
Absolutely.
And I imagine, sorry to keep cutting you off, but I imagine that has something to do with how the person has understood the event. What that says about them and their relationship with others. Yeah,
earlier you were asking me about attachment and early attachment. So first of all, if there was a disruption to early attachment, it has a huge effect. So if, for example, there was a separation from that mother in that early attachment, or maybe there was very good, secure attachment in the first few years of life, but then something happened where that was disrupted in a major way, right? So now that person experiences the world as much more unsafe and unpredictable, and that the people that I care about and I trusted might suddenly disappear on me, then that means that when they later in life have another kind of traumatic event, it is fueled by the past trauma. Whereas the same thing happens to another person who did not experience that same kind of loss, isn't going to necessarily experience it the same. They're maybe because, like, say the loss was, okay, let's say each person, we're talking about two people here, one who experienced major childhood loss, one who didn't. Well, let's say they both have let's say it's a woman and they both have a boyfriend that they really like. Well, let's say both of their boyfriends die in a car crash. Maybe it's a teenage drinking, driving thing. Well, the one who is never had a childhood trauma is going to be traumatized by that event because nobody wouldn't be. But it's not laden with the fact that people I care about always disappear on me. And here's another example of a loss, another example of how I can't trust anything in the world or anybody, right? And the world is simply an unsafe place. Whereas you know what I mean? The one person's going to feel it that way and the other person isn't necessarily going to.
Now, we spoke earlier about the fact that perhaps we live in a day and age where people aren't heard the way they should be, seen the way that they should be. And we're generalizing, of course, and it's always tempting to look on the past with rose-colored lenses. But could that be the reason why, objectively lesser evils traumatize a person today more than they may have in the past? If someone is in a tight family unit where they feel heard and seen and they're not constantly being distracted by technology, they have interactions, you think of people like John Paul II, right? His mother died, his father died, his brother died. He's an orphan at a somewhat young age, not a child, but, you could see something like that completely taking somebody out. It didn't in his instance. And I wonder if that's because he had, we can only speculate, but greater attachments in other areas, a sense of self that one may not experience today. Yeah.
So I personally think that relates to some way he adapted. And again, I don't know
speculating
what John Paul II's full experience was, but in some way, he experienced trauma clearly. In some way, he was able to interpret to that trauma in a way that was adaptive. Right? Like I feel that way too, because I had a pretty, difficult childhood in some ways and, an abusive father and all of this. And one way that was adaptive for me was I experienced literally the crucifix and seeing the crucifix and hearing and having the sense that Christ understood my pain and my suffering and was with me. So now I've just had a positive adaptation to suffering.
Is this when you were a child? You experienced the crucifix like that?
Yeah, when I was like 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was this huge grace. And I learned in that moment, no matter what was still happening or what I went back into, I had a sense that my suffering and pain was seen and known, that Christ was there to comfort and soothe me, and that he wanted what was good for me. So that's powerful. That was a secure attachment with God. And so more bad things could continue to happen. And I had that as a way of looking at the world.
A lens, right?
A lens through which to look at the world that was adaptive. And that's why because I look back at it myself right now. I treat people with trauma, and I sometimes go, "Holy crap! How did I turn out so good?" I mean, I don't mean that in an ego way. I just say I should be way more messed up,
way
than
more
I
dysfunctional.
am.
Yeah,
and I'm like, but how? Well, I adapted to it. What do you do with a child who goes, I was abused by, I don't know, a neighbor or something for 5 years in horrific ways, and I prayed the Hail Mary every night, and God never answered my prayer. So what happens to that person, right? They learn to despair, and they learn to say, God isn't there for me. I'm alone in the universe. And all other possible dysfunctions. Like other people get redeemed, but I don't. Other people get saved, and I don't. And that becomes their pattern in the way that they interpret and see the world, right? So one is adaptive now, and one is not, right? In terms of developing further resilience.
I'm thinking too, this is something I'm encountering as I speak to parents and children, right? When I was a kid, and I did get bullied at different occasions, in junior high and high school. And there was times I absolutely hated it, hated going to school, hated encountering these people. But then I would go home and there was a real separation between them and my family. It was a different life.
Right.
Whereas today, back to technology, a child never leaves that abusive environment if they have a phone.
Right.
And if they're in an abusive environment to begin with, they can't run away from the bullying. They're constantly, it's all in their apps. People are always communicating. They never get to leave it and to kind of have that sort of solid and undistracted attachment to their family.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much that's playing into sort of childhood trauma as it pertains to bullying. And I actually, now that I'm sitting here, I'm wondering if this is why we're speaking in part so much about bullying today, because we're less able to handle it.
I hadn't actually thought of it that way, but I like how you put that. And I do think, there's your identity. Here's another thing. We've been talking about the self, right? And how created in God's image and all this. Well, if as a kid, my self, my identity is not actually, in my mind anyway, in me, but it's out there. So in other words, my identity is online, right? So who I am is my Instagram page or Facebook or what have you, and it's not in me. Then that is constantly subject to people liking me and thinking I'm amazing, and people thinking I'm useless or I'm whatever. And so my identity is external to me now. Ooh. Right? And that's going to cause a person to always be up and down by whatever others.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because when I was a kid and the internet didn't exist, I guess the way in which you would present the part of you that you wanted to be acknowledged was through your, say, fashion.
Right.
Or through you associate with a particular band, and you show them who you are by what you dress and how you walk and how you speak.
Right.
That's kind of really the only way you can do it. Whereas, as you said today, it's almost like we've taken that part of ourselves that we want to project and we've totally disassociated it from us, and it's this thing I manage over here.
Right.
Is that kind of what you mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. Because it really fits with people in general who, sometimes the word is codependency, right? I don't always love that term.
Explain that.
Yeah. Well, the way I define codependency is your identity is outside of yourself. And so you allow others to manage your identity in some way. So in the case, say, the traditional codependent, like when codependency was first talked about, it was in terms of like the alcoholic husband and the codependent wife.
Yep.
We now know it's way bigger than that.
Okay.
But if we just look at that kind of typical situation, what is she doing? She's enabling the alcoholic, right? Because her identity is in taking care of him. And maybe he's a broken bird, right? Of course he's a broken bird. And her identity is saving him and managing him and protecting him, right? And so she's the one who takes care of him when he gets home drunk or he gets into a bar fight or she's bailing him out of jail, and she's taking care of him, right? So her whole identity is in his addiction, right? So she no longer has any sense of who she is in relation to him. So what she has to do in order to recognize she has to start recognizing her own identity and who she is to protect her true self. To be healthy, she has to have boundaries.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Everything's good? Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. So codependency, one way to define it is when you take your identity kind of in your relationship to another person. Is that right? Or?
Yeah. In some level, you're addicted to relationships, but you're addicted to managing them.
Sometimes you hear about the widow or the mother whose husband left her, and she kind of treats her. Maybe this is different, but she treats her child almost like a quasi-husband. She gets her emotional needs met through him. Right. That's probably different to what we're talking about. Yeah,
it's related. It's related, but that's parentification. So in other words, they've taken the child and made them a substitute parent. Okay. So now the child's identity, it's inappropriate, right? So if we take that to attachment theory, then the child is supposed to, even if they're 15, 16, is supposed to still know that the parent is the parent, caregiver, the person who kind of establishes safety.
Okay.
So now all of a sudden they're in a relationship. Hey, it might feel good that mom is including me and telling me all of her pains and sorrows and difficulties and challenges.
Yeah.
And it might feel like, oh, I'm important.
Yeah.
And all this. So there's a level at which that might feel good, but there's a deeper level which it feels extremely unsafe because now I'm still a child and I have to be in the role of an adult with the adult that is supposed to take care of me. So no one is really taking care of me like a child.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. But then that child learns my identity is in taking care of people that are supposed to take care of me. And that sets them up to be in relationships where they continue to do that, where their whole role is to take care of somebody else and never have their own needs met.
So what's another example then of the kind of, sorry, what was the term again? Codependency. So you gave the example of the wife and the drunk husband.
Right.
What's another thing we're
It's
seeing?
interesting because I'm always fascinated with male codependence, right? Because a lot of men are actually very codependent.
Interesting.
And that means they're very, people pleasers, people who are very concerned what other people think about them.
That's funny because when I hear codependence, I always think of it in an intimate relationship. But it sounds like the way you're beginning to use it doesn't have to be an intimate relationship.
It's not. It's actually because the person is disconnected from their true identity, so they really can't be intimate in a deep way with somebody else.
Or an important relationship is what I mean.
Right.
But it sounds like you're saying someone can be codependent with people that aren't that important to them. Say somebody at the pub.
Oh, I see.
Somebody they work with, somebody they see at the golf range or whatever.
Absolutely. Because, it's complex and people are different. But in general terms, if I'm codependent, I may want everyone to like me at work. And so it's very important to my sense of identity that others like me. And so I'm constantly making choices so that those other people will affirm me and positively regard me.
Yes.
Right? And I am not actually acting from my true self or even understanding my own needs. It's always secondary.
That's really interesting because I see that in myself in different ways, but I see that in other people too who, they're very pleased, try to please people and then they say something totally different. You're like, what's going on there?
Well, what can happen too is to the codependent, right, is that in time, if they're not actually getting the information they're looking for, right, or whatever, they're taken advantage of by people because people learn, that this person doesn't actually take care of their own needs. Now, it's not a conscious learning, but they realize that, and so they start treating them like they can take advantage of them. They're not that important. They're always going to say yes to anything. They're always, if I ever need help, this person's always going to just do it. And they after a while, the codependent person feels unloved and just used. And then what can happen is they can, in some way, get negative. So if person, like some people could get, angry and resentful and take it out on people. There are codependents that might do that. It's more typically men. The other way, and I see this in more women, but men too, is passive aggressive. Right? Because now they've done I've been everybody's friend and I've helped everybody out of everything. Nobody cares about me. Right? So they go into a victim mode possibly, and then they go into a mode of how can I get people to do what I want them to do? I can't confront them or be direct about it because that breaks all the rules. So I'm going to find ways to guilt them. I'm going to find ways to send the message.
Punish them.
Yeah. To punish them, but in a way that they don't know they're being punished.
Like I'll snub you, I'll give a dismissive and then I'll pretend it didn't mean anything. Something like that.
Perfect. Exactly. Exactly that.
Yeah. I may have had some experience with that if you can't tell. This is kind of going back to what we spoke about earlier in regards to anxiety, which you said was a reaction to a real or perceived threat. And maybe we can actually fall in, thinking that anxiety is always a negative thing. But obviously, coronavirus, this relatively new thing, I imagine there's appropriate ways to be anxious, yes?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think here's the thing. Anxiety is a normal process for our body. We are supposed to have these reactions to
So the goal isn't to eliminate all anxiety.
Right. No, we can't.
That's good.
Because otherwise, we can't be Daredevil, the man without fear. Like we have to be, we have to have fear because it protects us. So when there's a real threat, we do need to respond. Now, the problem with something like coronavirus is that it is a real threat, I believe. It's kind of an unknown, but it's not a bear most of us can get together and take down. Right? It's
in fact, we're being told not to get together.
Right, exactly. And so that actually creates a sort of a general malaise or chronic anxiety because there's this thing looming over us that we have no way, it might not feel like we have a way to tackle. And then we start to get fears because, is our government or, this and that, are they doing the right thing? And so it creates, I think, a lot of a real sense of anxiety that is could be chronic if this goes on for weeks and weeks and months and months. And also it has another impact. There's a societal kind of anxiety that kind of takes hold. It's a little bit like 9/11. It's like even though it might have happened to specific people in New York City, our whole country experienced a trauma. And our whole country had anxiety about it. Even with the threat of terrorism, our whole country has that as a generalized anxiety. So you're dealing with your own, but you're also part of this bigger connection, right? And so so it requires a little bit of specific work and recognition that's different than just what I was describing earlier about like your drive into work and stress at work.
Yeah. So you can have a legitimate anxiety about something and an understandable, I guess anxiety can always be understandable if you ask enough questions, but it might be right to have a particular level of anxiety, say about coronavirus, but then no doubt you could fuel it in an unhealthy way. And I imagine that's what's going on as people consume media every hour.
Right.
What's your sort of advice to people who do that, who are looking into a lot of political media and
Right. Well, my advice there is to limit it because I think that we do want to stay informed, so we don't want to eliminate it. I think it's important to stay informed, but we don't want to be taxing our system constantly with something we don't really have control over. So I have to start with the fact that there are some things I can do. Like they're telling us to wash our hands and do some social distancing.
You have some hand sanitizer in your bag.
Yeah, I'm trying to be real good about it.
Good
job. You should be a bit further away, but that's all right.
I'll look this way from now on. Yeah.
Well, looking away is not going to change anything.
What if I cough?
But yeah. So I can do some things these are the things we're told to do, and I can do that. But I have to stop and say that's all I can do. You know what I mean? I can't control or manage more than that. I'm not a chemist in some lab working on the vaccine. There's nothing else I can do. And I feel like there has to be a level of surrender to that it's a deep level. And I feel like as a Christian, I have resources of, that help me to surrender, and taking it to the cross, for example, and just saying, God, it's in your hands. I can only do my best. And the rest I have to give to you.
Yes.
I know that sounds like maybe a cliche, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
And it has to be a deep level of surrender. Now, I would go back to the same elements, though, that are true. Start with my body. Just us talking about the coronavirus, has that caused some tension? Do I feel a little bit in my chest? Actually, I do a little bit. Did I see my shoulders get a little tense? Just a little. But I can stop and go, okay, right now I'm still sitting with Matt. We're sitting here. We're safe as we can be.
He probably doesn't have the coronavirus.
But I can't actually go to there. I can't go there because I don't know.
I see.
Right? I don't actually know. It has to be pure truth. Pure truth right now is that you and I, right in this moment, are actually safe. We're breathing. We seem healthy.
Yep.
We don't have symptoms. Right now, I am fine and safe. Right now. Take a deep breath. Sit with that. So attention to my body. The second part I was kind of doing, which is like go to God, Jesus. I don't control this universe. You do. I'm going to bring my anxieties and worries about it. I'm just going to put it at the cross. Lord, take care of me. Whatever your will is in this whole situation, let it be. So there's an emotional connection with God. So then I'm getting to the emotional center. And now I can be a lot more reasonable in my thinking and go, all right, I'm okay. What do I want to do today?
That's really good. Yeah, I was reading another book by Father Jacques Philippe, School of the Holy Spirit, and in it he talks about surrender to events, right? An event might be you lose your job, or you get employed, or, a coronavirus, things you can't control. And one of the good things about events and responding to them is that they're concrete, objective things outside of myself. They're not subjective realities. And very often when we talk about God's will, we're dealing with subjective realities. Like, does the Lord want me to be a priest? Does he want me to pursue this woman? Like, what do you want, Lord? I'll be faithful to you. And I think, many of us want to say that, and we should say that. Like, I want to be faithful to you, Lord. But when it comes to objective events, we're not saying that all things that happen are from God's will. God doesn't will sin, but he permits sin. And if it's outside of my control, I have to accept that in the wisdom of God, this is something that he is permitting. And I don't just have to be sort of, resigned in a sort of unhappy way, but I can praise the Lord for it. This happened to me a couple of weeks ago when somebody hacked into my Instagram account. Did I tell you about that?
Yeah, you did.
This was after my interview with Gerry, who is a convert from Islam. So we spoke all about Islam. And then we found out that right after that, someone hacked in from Iran. And they tried and they failed. And then there was another attempt and it failed. And then they finally got in. And at first, is this something personal, isn't it? It was. They were kind of writing about me on the stories that they had. So I had like 35,000 followers, Gerry,
Wow.
On this Instagram account, which is a lot for me, for many people. But I think I was just given a grace from our Lord that I was happy. I just thought, praise you, Lord. Like, take all of it if you want to take all of it.
Yeah.
That was like a real concrete example where I had the opportunity to surrender it, not in a fatalistic sort of way. I'm doing what I can to restore it, but it's in a kind of a peaceful, restful way.
Yeah. To me, that speaks to detachment. We've been talking about attachment, but then there's this idea of detachment, which means I don't have to be attached to the things of this world. I don't have to be attached to material goods. I don't have to be attached where I'm clingy. Maybe it's more of an insecure attachment where I'm clingy and anxious about everything that goes on in the world. I love the word I like to use, I get from St. Francis de Sales, and St. Ignatius used it a few times, which is holy indifference. And holy indifference doesn't mean you don't care. It means that you are dispassionate to some extent. And so you are, which it sounds like you were able to get to with the Instagram hacking, right? Where you're able to go, you know what? I can't control this world. I can't control other people.
I can't control me a lot of the time.
Right,
Or at least it feels that way.
Well, you can control your immediate behavior,
yes.
but you can't control others. And you couldn't control this hacker in Iran, right? So you have to be able to detach. And I believe that when we do detach with holy indifference, we're more able to love. And when we can't, we go into those anxious, insecure states, and we actually become harmful to others in some way, and maybe to ourselves, right? And it's not intentional necessarily, but it's just, what it means. Like, you could have gotten into, had a panic attack, or got into a state, or become irritable and crabby with your family, or, you know what I mean? Or just said, I don't care anymore. I'm not going to try anymore. Who cares about, the world? And then, then that would have stopped you from doing good in the world. That would have stopped you from being good as a husband and a father. That would have, and also maybe damaged your health to some extent.
Yeah. Tell us about your work with Souls and Hearts, the podcast you're doing, the courses you're setting up. I know it's helping a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, we're really excited. We're just launching this first course that is a paid course. We have a number of them that are available that are free. But the first one we're doing is called Restoring Your Marriage After the Discovery of a Pornography Issue. That's how we titled it. And in that course, there's actually, I think, 24 modules. And it's a step-by-step guide for couples to actually address the pornography issue. Not just, let's say it's the husband. It's not always, but let's say it's the husband. To actually address the addiction, but also the relationship. And also to attempt to meet the needs of the wife. who is often labeled a codependent, but in reality she may be, but she may also just simply be kind of traumatized or just disturbed by it. And so every module has, there's sort of a little lesson. And then there's
these video lessons?
It's a video lessons, yep. And by yours truly here. And there's an activity for the husband to do, the wife to do, and for them to do together. And so they go through, and pretty much all the modules, there's 3.
And how long are the videos?
They're short. Each one's like about 8 minutes
That's
or so.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so
then
you can do it.
How much is this particular course?
How much is it
if
cost?
You don't mind me asking.
We price it at $250. Because it's a lot of time and attention. It'd probably save you about 4 or 5 counseling sessions, which would add up to a lot more than that. Because I'm not doing counseling per se, but I'm providing the education that you sometimes get from it, and activities and resources, so that you might still go see a counselor, but it would benefit you. Would get more out of it.
Here's what I love about that, because when I started my 21-day detox from porn course, Strive, people can go get it at strive21.com. I wanted it to be like a few $100s, and it's now free. Well, let me tell you what happened. It was originally like $50-$60 because I created the content, but there's obviously a publisher.
Yeah.
But then they sold it to Covenant Eyes. And so Covenant Eyes wants it to be free, right, to get it out there, which I'm thrilled about. I mean, I don't make any money from it now, which, but I'm really glad it's going to reach a lot more people. But what we saw was when people invest financially, they're far more likely to recognize that this is a thing of value, which I'll see to the end.
Yeah.
I actually like the idea of charging more for it, because I've seen that in my own life. Like if something's free, it's like everything else on the internet that's free. I have no value to it. But it was a couple of years ago, I did this particular health challenge with a friend of mine, and it was like a 12-week course. It was $500.
Right.
And we looked at it, we assessed it, and we decided to commit. Now, that was a lot of money for me. I don't usually do something like that. But I actually stuck to it. And it's not something I would have stuck to. So I'm just saying I'm glad that you charge for it.
There's a lot in that course that will help you do some serious marital work. Some of the modules I was like, this should be a whole other course, because it really would benefit any couple, even if it's not pornography addiction, because it really gets into improving your relationship and having really to have a secure attachment is the ultimate goal. Even though there's a porn issue that was discovered and is causing this problem, by the end of this course, I can't guarantee you're going to have secure attachment with your spouse, but that is what the course is trying to get at through the exercises.
Have you got any feedback from these courses yet, or have you launched this one yet?
This one is just about to be launched.
Oh, that's exciting.
The other courses people have taken, we have one on how to help a loved one in distress. We've had people really, and that one's free.
That's cool. You have free course. You mentioned this earlier, but say that again. You have some free courses.
Yeah, one is called How to Help a Loved One in Distress.
Oh, that's really neat.
It's Dr. Peter Malinowski and me doing that one. And so it's just like giving you practical tips and strategies, like if you're helping somebody that's going through a really difficult time, what to do to help them, what's helpful, what's not helpful, and this kind of thing. We have another course called A Catholic's Guide to Finding a Therapist, which is free as well.
Great.
And it is completely robust with all everything you would want to know about how to pick a really good therapist. Oh, that's
fantastic. Because that actually was going to be one of my questions about that.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So that's really great. So where can people find that?
It's at soulsandhearts.com.
And then you have a podcast by the same name.
Yes.
How's that going?
It's called Be With the Word. And it's
we mentioned this earlier.
Yeah, Dr. Peter and I, every single week, we reflect on the Sunday readings.
Okay.
So we try to bring in a psychological element. So it's not just what you would get from the Magnificat reading or something like this.
That's really cool. And when do you release them in the week?
Every Tuesday.
That's great. So people right now can go download Souls and Hearts. They can. That's great, because a lot of us are pretty poor at reading the Sunday reading ahead of time. So they get it given to them. You do a breakdown.
Yeah. I've had priests comment on it, how helpful it's been, and to kind of go deeper with it. So a lot of people are really enjoying it. I've started to be a little more vulnerable too in the podcast. We've been improving.
Good for you.
Because I'm not a celebrity like you, and it's taking some time.
I'm not a celebrity, but it's always a work in progress. I mean, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's sort of finding that level of vulnerability that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be voyeuristic, there is that tendency maybe, or that temptation to share too much at the expense of your family or loved ones.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of managing that to some extent.
Me too.
There's another one, if I could mention, is Fly on the Wall. And that one is free as well. It's kind of a podcast kind of thing, but it's a once a month thing. And it's a group of Catholic psychologists sitting around talking about different topics. So
fly on the wall.
Fly on the wall.
Okay.
And we've had discussions on church scandals. We've had discussions about boundaries with clients. And it's like you get to sit in and listen on these different Catholic psychologists discuss these issues. So if that's interesting to you.
That's really great. Now, you just mentioned boundaries, which reminded me that I wanted to ask you about that since we were talking about codependency.
Right.
What do we mean by boundaries? Okay,
so a boundary is where we protect ourself in a healthy way. Right, or at least a healthy boundary is. So, which is different than an ultimatum, because an ultimatum is where you are trying to control and manage somebody else and their behavior, which is sort of a codependent behavior. But a healthy boundary is saying, I am, say, a child of God. I am a human being with worth. I have needs of my own. And I need to protect those. So if I'm in a relationship where somebody is being abusive, whether they're toxic in some way, it might just be a verbal kind of thing. It could be physical. It could be a number of things. What am I doing to protect myself from that behavior, right? And sometimes it's relationships that like with a parent or whatnot, where it's a little bit subtle, or we're just so used to it that we don't notice, right? It's not always like, obviously if somebody hits you in the face, you say, okay, I'm not coming back here anymore. That's my boundary, right? And I'm not going to be hit again. But it can just be like, a parent saying, making comments, casual comments like, oh, I noticed you're wearing that color today. Yeah, what's with that? Well, immediately, you could say, well, that's just a comment, but and it shouldn't bother me that much. Why is this person always making those kind of comments? Because it feels like I'm just being criticized, right? It doesn't, and yet it's done in a way, so that sort of passive-aggressive behavior, it's done in a way that puts me off guard and makes me defensive or what have you. And so a boundary might be where you set a boundary with the person and you say, listen, when you just made that remark, that actually hurt my feelings. You might or might not say that. It's a bit of vulnerability, but it's not okay. So if you do that again, I'm sorry, but if you're on the phone, I'm going to get off the phone. Or if you're visiting, so I'm going to leave, right? So you set a boundary with the person, and in which case then you have to actually follow through. So then when you follow through, it's like, well, then the person does it again, and you say, listen, I talked to you about this. It's not okay to criticize me in this way. I'm going to leave now.
What's interesting is that it almost sounds like in a way that we talk, we do this with children, right? We set boundary with children. Look,
right.
If you do that, you have to go sit on the stairs. How old are you? 5? Okay, so it's going to have to be 5 minutes now.
Okay.
So that's the boundary, right? And they do it, and it's so important to follow through. You've set that boundary. It's a known boundary.
Right.
But of course, when you're talking with like a peer, you don't want to sort of speak down to them. It must be difficult to try and sort through, am I being overly sensitive, or is there something that they're saying that is legitimately unacceptable? How do I communicate this in a way that's respectful, not patronizing?
Right. Well, here's the thing. One thing I try to do is recognize, and this is going to be maybe difficult language for some people, but am I in the self is one way to put it. Am I connected to me, who I am? Or is it a manager just trying to, part of me just trying, to manage the situation? If I'm connected to my true self, then I'm more able to actually recognize what my needs really are. And I'm not just trying, I'm not being a codependent or just trying to manipulate. So it's a way of recognizing, am I being manipulative? I think it's a fair question. Am I oversensitive? But I would say that if you are asking yourself, am I oversensitive? Then you're probably caught in a relationship where somebody's being codependent with you. Because if you were an insensitive person, you probably wouldn't ask yourself that.
If you're being insensitive.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's I'm generalizing, but yeah.
Well, that's very good.
And it's a way, and it's probably a way that you've learned to disregard your own needs by criticizing your needs and saying that you're insensitive or you're a baby or what's wrong with you or get over it.
Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up here. We're going to take some time over on Patreon. So for our patrons, you can go over, watch the rest of this clip, and we're going to talk about some helpful conversation starters for date nights and things like that. It's going to be fantastic. But before we wrap up, here on YouTube. Tell people how they can find you just one more time. Anything final you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, find me on soulsandhearts.com. We're also Be With The Word and Fly on the Wall are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those things. You can also, if you're in the Atlanta area looking for counseling, I'm at transfigurationcounseling.com as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Gerry. This has been fantastic.
Loved it. Thank you.